Hey guys, tonight we're time traveling into a world so cold, so brutally indifferent to your comfort that you probably won't survive this. Seriously. You've heard about Viking toughness before, beards, axes, longboats, all that. But none of that compares to this little detail. They survived Arctic winters without fireplaces. Yeah, wrap your modern mind around that while you're snuggled under a blanket. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is. I want to know who else is freezing right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. It starts with a long sigh and a full body shiver. You've just stepped off the imaginary time travel platform and right into the 9th century, standing in knee-deep snow, somewhere near the Arctic Circle. The sky overhead is the colour of cold iron, and the wind is doing its best to saw through every layer you're wearing. You're in a Viking settlement, not the pillaging kind today, just the surviving kind, and your first realization is simple but grim. This is a cold you don't negotiate with. It doesn't care about your feelings or your fingers. You glance around. Snow-blasted hills, reindeer tracks, some shaggy cattle huddled together like a cursed livestock plush toy, and a cluster of longhouses partially buried in snowdrifts. There's smoke rising, barely. Not chimney smoke, though. More like lazy, curling trails sneaking out of the eaves, as if even the fire's too tired to fight the cold. You expected hearths, maybe roaring fireplaces. There are none. Instead, the homes look low and wide, like someone tried to build a house and ended up with a buried canoe. That's your destination. Welcome home. You stomp through the snow toward one of the bigger longhouses. The doors are short. You have to crouch just to enter, which is either charming or spine-crushing depending on your mood. Inside it's dim, smoky and humid. That last one surprises you. It's warmer than outside, sure, but not by much. A weak fire crackles in a shallow pit in the middle of the floor. It's not blazing, it's more like it's sulking. You get the sense it knows its role, heat the soup, not the house. There's no chimney, just a small hole above to let the smoke meander out. You inhale and immediately regret it. The air tastes like wet wool, old meat, wood smoke, and about 4 different kinds of sweat. But this is survival, Viking style, and your modern nose needs to get over itself. The room is long, really long. On either side are raised wooden platforms with bundles of animal hides and fur. You spot people wrapped like burritos, sharing body heat, muttering in Old Norse. You also spot chickens, and a dog, and something you really hope is a goat. You settle near the fire pit trying to warm your hands, and a grey-bearded Viking named Hrolfr slides a cup of something hot and mysterious toward you. It smells fermented. He grunts in what you hope is a welcoming tone. This is not a place for small talk. This is a place for endurance. You begin to realise the trick isn't staying warm. It's never letting yourself get too cold. That's a whole different mentality. You ask about fireplaces. Hrolfr looks confused, as if you'd asked why the snow doesn't grow up instead of down. Here's the deal. Viking architecture isn't about maximising heat, it's about minimising loss. The walls of the longhouse are thick, sometimes 4 or 5 layers deep. Wooden frames packed with turf, moss and mud, nature's own insulation. It's more thermos than house. And that fire pit? It's mostly for cooking and ritual. The real warmth comes from shared heat, sealed space and layers of fur. As the sun dips, which it already kind of is, even though it's barely midday, you notice something else. There's no wasted movement here. People huddle close, conserve energy. It's not just practical, it's spiritual. These people have rituals, routines, patterns that carry them through the long dark. This isn't just winter, it's a siege. Outside, the wind kicks up again, screaming past the sod-covered walls. You step to the edge of the door and peek out. The world is blue and grey and white like it's been drained of all colour. Your boots crunch against frozen straw. There's a stillness here that's almost sacred. Or terrifying. Take your pick. Then a moment of unexpected beauty. A woman begins to hum near the back of the longhouse. A lullaby or prayer, you can't tell. It's haunting, melodic, and it loops in your brain like a spell. You sit back down near the fire, let the smoke sting your eyes a little, and lean into the animal skin padding. You're not comfortable, but you're warm enough, and maybe, just maybe, you'll make it through your first night. Here's your historical nugget for the evening. Archaeologists studying Norse settlements in Greenland and Iceland have confirmed that most Viking homes had central hearths without chimneys, relying on roof holes or venting smoke through the turf walls. That meant warm floors but perpetually smoky air. It was functional but probably terrible for your lungs. Now the quirky twist. Some Viking settlements in Iceland showed signs of using geothermal steam, literal hot spring water to heat bathhouses. Yeah, ancient hot tubs. Think of it as the Viking version of spa day, minus the eucalyptus towels. But scholars still argue this. Were Viking winters truly survivable for everyone? Or did only the strongest or most social make it through? Was this a society that naturally selected the well-adapted and the lucky? Or were there quiet winters full of loss that history just doesn't write about? You settle into your spot, head spinning slightly from the smoke and fermented drink. You're not sure if you're tired or just being hypnotised by the crackling fire. But either way, your first Arctic night is beginning. You've got no chimney, no thermostat, and honestly no idea how this is going to go. You wake up coughing, it's still dark, though that doesn't mean much this far north. Darkness isn't a nightly visitor here, it's a permanent roommate. You blink against the haze, trying to remember where you are. Oh, right, 9th century Viking longhouse, no chimney. A thick stew of smoke still clings low to the ceiling, rolling lazily like a slow-moving fog. Your throat feels like you've been gargling pine tar. You try to sit up and smack your head on the low beam overhead. Welcome back. Around you, the longhouse has started to stir. It's early, but time here is more of a suggestion than a schedule. A young boy throws a handful of damp moss onto the fire pit. It flares briefly, then sizzles into a reluctant smoulder. The embers groan. People rise in layers of wool and fur, shoulders hunched, eyes bleary. No one says much. The cold outside is a known enemy, and the warmth inside is a fragile treaty at best. You're still thinking about the fireplace thing, like really? Not one real fireplace? In all this frozen desolation? It's not just about comfort, it's survival. Your modern brain keeps looking for a hearth, a chimney, something with a roaring blaze where people hang stockings or dry their socks. Instead, you get a fire pit that mostly smokes and sputters, and somehow this works. The chieftain's longhouse where you slept is the biggest in the village. It belongs to Adis, a woman with more fur than Nemotion and a stare sharp enough to cut fish. She's already up, sipping something hot and bitter from a horn cup. She notices you shivering and gives a dry smirk. Cold? She says. You nod. She points to the ceiling. Smoke stays up, heat stays down, you stay alive. Then she walks away like she's just solved the theory of everything. You decide to look around, trying to understand how this place holds heat without any modern design. You press your hand against the wall. It's slid, a mixture of timber logs packed tight with turf, straw, moss and clay. The outside layer is frozen stiff, but the interior is slightly warmer. Like a really determined sandwich. The thatched roof is sloped low, heavy with earth, designed less for elegance and more for not collapsing under a ton of snow. Turns out, these longhouses are more like buried boats, low profile, wind deflecting and built to retain every precious calorie of warmth. The floors aren't wooden, they're packed dirt, sometimes lined with planks or rushes. In the night you could feel the faintest warmth rising up through them, maybe from trapped body heat or just the insulating layer of animal skins. You think about medieval castles with their cavernous stone halls and grand hearths and realise those were luxuries. Out here, survival is about containment. It's about keeping the heat close, not chasing it up a chimney. You watch as people go about their morning tasks. Someone's milking a goat in the back corner. A boy scrapes frost off a shield hanging by the door. A woman hammers dried fish into flakes to add to a pot of whatever's boiling. Everything is close, tight, efficient. You realise with a jolt that the idea of separate rooms is laughable here. There's no privacy, no bedrooms, no kitchen. Just zones, sleeping zone, cooking zone, goat zone, and all of it designed to share every drop of heat generated by every person, animal and ember. You huddle near the fire pit again and someone hands you a bowl. It's porridge, mushy, warm. It has an earthy flavour you can't place, probably because it includes bark or lichen or something your taste buds weren't designed for. You eat it anyway. Everyone else is. No one wastes energy chewing the fat, literally or figuratively. They eat in silence, wrapped in cloaks, steam rising from their bowls and nostrils. After breakfast, the door creaks open, and a blast of cold punches the room like a ghost with anger issues. 2 men come in carrying firewood, their cheeks red and beards frosted. The logs they drop by the fire aren't your standard hardwood either, These are scrawny birch, some moss-covered driftwood, and bundles of dried peat. Peat is the key. Dug from bogs and left to dry, it burns slowly, smells a bit like dirt tea, and is way easier to store than giant tree trunks. Turns out big wood fires are for people who don't live on the edge of nowhere. And here's the interesting bit. These fire pits aren't meant to heat the whole house. They're used to warm the centre just enough, cook food, maybe boil water. The real insulation strategy is you, your body heat. Your proximity to other warm bodies. Your refusal to die of exposure. You're not surviving because of a fireplace, you're surviving without one by design. There's another layer to this though. You notice it slowly as you move through the longhouse. The walls aren't straight. The layout isn't linear. Everything curves just a bit. The corners are softened. Turns out this is deliberate. Heat hates corners. It escapes, gets trapped, dissipates. These structures are built to circulate warmth, not just contain it. It's kind of genius, and totally counterintuitive if you're used to square houses and central heating. You also start to pick up on something else. The rhythm of life here is slow, not lazy, just deliberate. Everything is paced to conserve. You move less, talk less, even breathe less deeply when you're inside. Every action is calculated to stretch the thin layer of warmth over the long, bitter months ahead. Here's tonight's historical fact. While Viking homes lacked true fireplaces, they did have central hearths that allowed for shared heating and cooking. The turf walls and shared animal heat were crucial, but so was ventilation. If done wrong, smoke inhalation could be as deadly as the cold, which is why most longhouses had smoke holes in the roof, or used angled rafters to direct smoke up and out without letting all the heat follow it. Now for something quirky. Archaeologists have found fish bones embedded in turf walls, possibly used for insulation, or maybe just leftovers getting weirdly repurposed. Either way, it worked. Fish walls. Bet your house doesn't have those. And the scholarly debate. Some historians argue that these communal heating strategies reflect a deeply collective mindset, while others think they were simply responses to environmental constraint. Was it about culture, or just cold? Maybe both. Maybe that's the Viking secret. Embrace the suffering, make it communal, and call it tradition. You rub your hands together over the sluggish fire and take another breath of that wood smoke and goat perfume. The wind howls outside, dragging snow across the frozen earth like sandpaper. But in here, somehow, you're surviving. No fireplace required. You decide it's time to explore more than just the smoke-choked centre of this survival experiment. You've survived a night, maybe even started to acclimate, though your lungs are still staging a mild protest. The longhouse, as you've noticed, is both womb and a prison, is dark even in daylight, low even when you're sitting, and heavy in a way that makes you feel like you're walking through someone else's memory. You start to understand why so many Norse myths happen in firelight. There's something about this space that feels half real, half dream. The deeper you go into the longhouse, the more obvious it becomes that this place wasn't built for comfort, but for durability. It's less a home in the modern sense and more a life support system. The walls curve ever so slightly inward, as if the house is hunching against the cold. You pass rows of storage bins carved from logs, bundles of dried herbs strung along the beams, and racks of tools and weapons that all look like they could be used to kill a bear or make a stew depending on the mood. And then there's the smell. That deep, earthy musk of turf and timber mingled with sweat, old meat and wood smoke. It's cloying but constant, and now it's beginning to feel almost normal. Like your brain has filed it under background noise, along with the creaking of beams, the low murmur of conversation, and the occasional bleating goat. Now here's the secret you've been stepping on without realising it. The real genius of this place isn't the fire, it's the house itself. The Viking longhouse is basically a thermos wrapped in a dirt blanket. The outermost layer is sod, strips of grass-covered earth stacked like bricks over a timber skeleton. That turf is not decorative, it's insulation that works year-round. In winter, it traps warmth. In summer, it deflects heat. The Norse knew this not from textbooks, but from sheer generational trial and error. Between the sod and the wood, a thick mix of straw and animal hair, sometimes even manure. That stuff fills gaps, blocks drafts, and bonus, smells like survival. You're getting up close now, running your fingers along a beam crusted in years of soot. You scrape a little bit away and see something etched beneath the grime. A carving. A rough spiral with runes circling the edge. not decorative, protective. This house isn't just built for warmth, it's built for warding off whatever else might be waiting in the dark. The layout begins to make more sense. The longhouse is divided into zones not by walls, but by purpose. Central fire pit in the middle, flanked by sleeping platforms on either side. At one end there's a storage area where dried fish, salted meat and smoked cheese hang like an edible chandelier. At the other, the livestock pen. You heard that right. Half the house is a barn. You finally peek into that end and, yep, there they are. Cows, sheep and goats packed together like warm, snoring radiators. It's steamy back here, in a weirdly gross and comforting way. You step carefully between piles of straw and other stuff. One of the cows flicks an ear at you, unimpressed. Another is being milked by a teenage girl who doesn't look up as she says, "Careful where you step, Loki likes to kick." You have no idea which animal is Loki, and you're not in the mood to find out the hard way. Here's the thing, this cohabitation isn't gross to them, it's essential. Animal heat, yep, literal body heat, is part of the house's warmth equation. And in the dead of winter, when your own body feels like a half-charged phone battery, a couple of warm cows make a huge difference. Think of it as the ancient equivalent of central heating, if your heater occasionally sneezes hay in your direction. You wander back toward the centre and sit near the edge of the raised platform where a few villagers are darning socks, sharpening blades and repairing fishing nets. It's a little social zone, not lively exactly, but cooperative. People share tools, grumble about snow levels, and pass around a horn of something fermented that hits your bloodstream like a hot brick. One of the old men leans toward you and croaks. You get used to it, the cold, the stink, the way you forget what colour the sky is. You ask him how long he's lived in this house, and he shrugs. "My father built this one. Before him, my mother's brother. We fixed the roof, patched the walls, but the bones stay the same." You're suddenly aware that this isn't just a house, it's an heirloom. A generational artifact still doing its job long after its builders became bones in the ground. You press your hand to one of the beams again, feel the worn grooves where generations have leaned, rested, survived. Here's your historical fact. Archaeological digs in Norse Greenland have revealed longhouses that were over 20 metres long, with thick turf walls and shared animal shelters built right into the structure. This wasn't rare, it was standard design for harsh climates, and it worked. These homes could hold heat and temperatures that would freeze your eyelashes in seconds. Quirky detail of the day? Some of these homes had the partial double walls, gaps between layers of turf and wood filled with straw feathers or even seaweed. Seaweed, It turns out if it's dry and packs tight, its insulations are also kind of salty. Vikings, as it seems, were practical to the point of weird genius. Now, the debate. Some scholars argue that these homes were masterpieces of environmental adaptation, rivaling Roman designs in function if not form. Others insist that their success was more about behavioural adaptation, how people used the space, not just how it was built. Were the houses brilliant, or were the people just brilliant at surviving? You lie back on the furs and look up at the rafters, barely visible in the murky light. The house groans in the wind. Snow pelts the sod roof above like tiny fists, but the cold doesn't reach you here. Not really. The house is doing its job, quietly, stubbornly, with all the charm of an old, creaky thermos that refuses to die. And you start to realise, kind of beautiful. Morning rolls into midday with barely a shift in the light. Outside, the sky still hangs low like a lid, and the wind sharpens its teeth against the longhouse walls. You decide it's time to brave the cold, not because you're some kind of hero, but because your body desperately needs movement. And frankly, you're starting to smell like smoked goat. So you bundle up like a human cabbage, layer after itchy layer of wool, fur, and, surprise, more wool. The process is absurd. First, a rough linen undertunic that feels like sandpaper. Then thick wool trousers, a heavy tunic, another tunic and a belt to hold it all down. Your feet disappear into hide-wrapped shoes lined with hay. That's right, hay. You wiggle your toes and feel the straw crunch. For outerwear, you're handed a reindeer hide cloak that still smells distinctly like reindeer. No zippers, no Gore-Tex, just ties, pins and hope. You finally emerge outside dressed like someone trying to impersonate a snowdrift. The cold hits you instantly, not like a slap. It's more like the breath gets sucked out of you by a silent, invisible force. Your eyelashes go stiff, Your nostrils freeze slightly every time you inhale, and yet you're not entirely miserable. You're insulated, in the most literal and unglamorous sense of the word. Out here, you can actually see how everyone else is dressed, and it's like a parade of slightly soggy woodland creatures. Wool hats with flaps, mittens made from felted scraps. Some people wear hoods so big they look like they've borrowed them from a monk with neck problems. The colours are muted, but here and there, a flash of dyed wool shows through, reds and blues, rare and precious. You follow Adis, the chieftain, as she walks the perimeter of the settlement, checking on fences, animals, and, occasionally, other humans who may or may not be pretending to work. She's dressed in a cloak so massive it trails behind her like a cape. "You're learning," she says without turning, nodding at your ridiculous ensemble. "You look less like a ghost." You pass a group of children chasing each other through the snow, bundled into so many layers they resemble angry marshmallows. Their laughter cuts through the wind like birdsong. One of them slips and lands face first in a drift, then pops up laughing with a chunk of ice stuck to his eyebrow. Apparently that counts as fun. Edie stops by one of the smaller longhouses. This one houses 2 families and their goats. She gestures at the sod-packed roof and grunts. "Good layers, good roof, bad layers, cold roof." Then she points to your cloak. "Reindeer's warm, don't let it get wet. Wet means death." It's not a metaphor. It's the law of the land. You help her haul some firewood, though wood is generous. Most of what you're carrying is driftwood and peat, both of which feel as light as frozen bread but burn long and hot. You pass a stack of something strange. Blocks of frozen moss and dried dung pressed into tight bundles. It's fuel. You make a face. Edie smirks. "You think fire cares what it eats?" You trudge back toward the longhouse and she pauses by a sled. It's crude, wood lashed together with hide, bones for runners, but clever. A few sealskins are bundled on top, stitched with waterproof seams. "For trading," she says, "or when we move." The idea of moving anywhere in this frozen void seems ludicrous, but she says it like moving is as normal as brushing your teeth. You're starting to realise that for all the weight of their world, these people are weirdly mobile, nomadic when they need to be, rooted when they must, adaptable to a fault. You ask how they stay warm without modern materials. Adis shrugs. "We use everything. Wool from sheep, fur from fox, leather from cow, even bird skin if it's soft." She chuckles at your wide-eyed look. "You want warm? Put a gull on your head." As the wind picks up, you realise the key isn't just the clothing, it's the strategy. Vikings didn't layer randomly. They used air pockets, loose wool to trap heat, tight leather to block wind, cloaks to create a personal heat bubble. You, meanwhile, are sweating like a liar in court and simultaneously freezing through your knees. You've got the gear, but not the wisdom yet. Back inside, you begin stripping off layers with the careful dread of someone who knows they have to put them all back on later. The re-entry into the smoky warmth feels like crawling into a low-budget sauna. Someone hands you a bowl of hot broth, and the steam fogs your eyebrows. It tastes like fish and desperation, but it's warm and that's enough. Historical fact-check time. Vikings were masters of wool. They bred sheep specifically for dense, warm fleece, and their textiles included a coarse, water-resistant outer layer called vadmal, which doubled as currency in some regions. They felted wool, literally pounding it until it thickened, to make garments that were both flexible and nearly windproof. Quirky fact, Vikings sometimes lined their boots with dried grass or hay to add insulation. Think of it as prehistoric Dr. Scholl's. Some even stuffed their sleeves with moss. Not exactly stylish, but if you've ever been snowed in with soggy socks, you'll understand the genius. The debate? Some scholars argue Vikings didn't suffer much from the cold due to their incredible clothing technology. Others suggest we romanticize it, and that hypothermia and frostbite were common, unrecorded facts of life. The truth likely lives in the margins. Some people adapted, some didn't, and the cold doesn't give participation trophies. You stretch out on a fur mat, feeling the weight of the day settle in your limbs. Outside, the wind growls like a hungry animal, but inside you're wrapped in wool and reindeer hide and a kind of reluctant respect for the people who made this work. You still smell like goat. You still can't breathe properly through your smoke-addled sinuses. But you're warm. For now. You don't remember falling asleep, but you wake up sandwiched between 2 very warm, very snoring bodies. One human, one goat. The human, a middle-aged woman with wild grey hair and a bear-like snore, is dead to the world, curled under a thick fur that smells like old cheese and pine. The goat, meanwhile, is wide awake and staring at you like it knows something about your soul that you don't. You're not sure which is more unsettling. This isn't exactly your idea of cosy, but as your toes wiggle in their hay-stuffed boots and your fingers flex without that brittle, frost-bitten feeling, and you get it. Body heat isn't just a byproduct of survival here. It's a resource, a form of currency. And in this longhouse, warmth isn't private. It's communal. You either share or you freeze. There's no third option. Across the room, another bundle of humans is beginning to stir. A boy kicks off his blanket and rubs sleep from his eyes with mittened fists. A woman reaches over and gently adjusts the fur cloak over a toddler, tucking it around his ears. A dog stretches and shakes out its shaggy coat, scattering a small flurry of dried hay and dust. The longhouse isn't quiet exactly, but its noises are low, muffled, intimate. You've never heard a group of people wake up in unison before. It's oddly comforting. Your own personal space bubble, something you took for granted in your world, is now completely gone, vanished, eviscerated. You're breathing the same air as 20 other people and several animals. You're sleeping shoulder to shoulder, hip to hip. Someone's foot is against your leg and it's not even weird anymore. In the Arctic winter, personal space is a luxury you give up if you want to see spring. There's a rhythm to it too. People switch positions during the night, like a choreographed tangle of limbs. Some sleep near the fire, some at the back, depending on health, age, or even social standing. The elders, sources of wisdom and heat, usually get prime spots. Children are tucked between adults like living heating pads. Infants sometimes sleep directly on the warmest parts of their mothers, wrapped in a fur that's been pre-warmed by someone's lap. You try sitting up and immediately regret it. The air up here is colder, the smoke thicker. It's like the difference between swimming underwater and standing in the steam room. You lie back down. That thin 6-inch difference is the barrier between reasonably warm and questioning your life choices. Rolfer, the grey-bearded man from earlier, gives you a knowing look from across the room. "Still alive?" he grunts. You nod, coughing slightly. He smiles, a rare event that cracks the lines in his wind-burned face. "Then you slept right." You didn't just sleep right. You slept like a person half dead with exhaustion, wrapped in a pile of other half-dead people pretending the night wasn't trying to kill them. This is more than survival. It's strategy. The Viking version of a sleepover, where hypothermia is the uninvited guest you all ignore, and not everyone sleeps on furs. In the poorer homes, people just sleep directly on hay or straw, maybe with a wool blanket if they're lucky. The fire rarely reaches the far ends of the longhouse, so those who sleep there depend almost entirely on the warmth of others. You think about that the next time you complain about cold sheets. Here's the thing that modern life doesn't prepare you for. Humans are heat-generating machines. A single adult gives off enough heat to raise the temperature of a small enclosed space by a few degrees. Multiply that by 20 people and 5 goats, and suddenly the longhouse becomes something more than a shelter. It's a slow cooker. Everyone simmers together. It's weird. It's gross. It's genius. You help with the morning clean-up, brushing loose hay off the sleeping platform and shaking out the furs near the fire. Someone tosses more peat onto the embers, and the flames crackle back to life with a small cheer from your aching joints. The smoke rises, hits the low roof, and spreads outward like a lazy cloud. A few people cough. Nothing new. Their lungs have been marinating in this stuff since birth. As the longhouse fills with motion, you notice the unspoken rules of proximity. No one sleeps alone unless they're quick. No one sleeps with anyone unless it's agreed upon beforehand. Kids cuddle with parents, siblings, even neighbours. It's less about relationships and more about thermodynamics. And as you notice a baby nestled between an old man and a young girl, you realise this is how humanity used to survive. Not by comfort, by community. Historical timeout. Studies of Viking-era settlements show consistent architectural design that prioritises centralised heating and communal sleeping arrangements. Even in large households, the sleeping quarters were shared spaces. Fewer walls meant less heat loss. This wasn't just practical, it was cultural. Norse society revolved around the group, not the individual. Now, your fringe fact. In some parts of medieval Scandinavia, winter weddings were scheduled not for romance, but for warmth, literally. More people in one room meant a warmer space. So yes, it's entirely possible that your wedding night included the bride, the groom, and Aunt Sigrid snoring 3 feet away. And tonight's scholarly debate? Some argue the communal sleeping model was a necessity born of climate. Others think it reflected a deeper social cohesion, one where privacy was less valued than interdependence. Either way, it's clear that for Vikings, warmth wasn't a personal achievement. It was a shared responsibility. You finish shaking out a heavy reindeer pelt and drape it back onto the platform. The fire glows faintly, casting flickering shadows across the beams overhead. Someone starts humming a low tune while stirring a pot of morning porridge, and another cracks open a small barrel of dried apples. The longhouse breathes like a single organism, slow, smoky, and stubborn. Outside, the sky is still iron grey. You pull your cloak tighter and look around at the sleepy faces, the steaming bowls, the goats chewing contentedly by the door. It hits you, quietly but clearly, in a place where the cold kills without warning. Survival isn't about how strong you are, it's about how close you're willing to get to the people around you, and maybe the goat. The next time you step outside, it's mostly because your eyes are starting to sting from the permanent cloud of smoke inside. Your cloak is damp from breathing, and your inner layers smell like boiled wool and last night's dinner. But as you crack open the longhouse door and the outside air rushes in, sharp, dry, almost surgical, you immediately question your decision. It's not just cold, it's mythological. The kind of cold that makes your teeth ache, even when you're not smiling, which you're definitely not. But as your boots crunch down onto the snow-packed earth, you realise something else. Silence. Not the kind that feels peaceful, but the kind that sounds like everything around you is holding its breath. There's no birdsong, no rustling of trees. Even the wind is subdued, sneaking low along the ground like it's afraid to make a scene. You walk the perimeter of the settlement again, tracing your steps from earlier. But now, instead of just observing the snow-covered roofs and fur-draped fences, you're noticing how every structure is playing a part in survival. It's like someone designed this place with a single command. Don't let the heat escape. You stop in front of a small rounded outbuilding. Looks like a buried beehive. One of the villagers sees you staring and walks over. Her name's Inga, and her nose is red enough to suggest she's been outside for too long. Storage hut, she says, built like a womb, warm inside. She beckons, and you duck through a squat entrance dug into the snowbank. Inside, you're hit with the rich smell of old grain, dried meat, and something tangy that might be fermented turnips. It's small, barely taller than you, round and completely encased in turf. No corners, just a tight circular shape meant to trap warmth like a cup holding steam. The walls are packed with snow on the outside but lined with straw, and hide on the inside, creating a thick, crude insulation that somehow works better than you'd expect. We sleep here sometimes, Inga mutters, pointing to a mat of hay and skins, when the wind's bad or the roof leaks. You glance up, there's no fire pit, no heat source at all, just trapped warmth lingering from a body that left hours ago. It's astonishing. This isn't just a storeroom, it's a pressure-sealed panic room made from dirt and instinct. You duck back outside and notice something else. Every structure in the village, from longhouse to latrine, is dug partially into the ground. At first glance, it looks like poor construction. But now you understand, it's smart. The earth holds heat. Build low, build half-buried, and the ground helps shield you from the cold. Above ground is a freezer. Below is a blanket. Back at the main house, you wander around the exterior. You run your hand along the turf-covered wall. It's frozen stiff on the outside but dry underneath. This turf has been stacked and maintained like bricks. Whole families spend summers harvesting and curing these thick chunks of earth to use during winter. You've never seen dirt treated with such reverence. You duck into a nearby shed where a man named Catil is repairing a set of skis made from curved ashwood. He's hunched over the bindings, using sinew like thread, his fingers red but steady. "These will get me to the fjord," he says, "even if the world freezes." You laugh, but Catil doesn't. He means it. The skis aren't recreational, they're transport. If you want food in winter, you don't wait for it to walk into your longhouse. You go get it. And if you're going to go get it through snow that swallows a man whole, you need skis, sleds, and knowledge of terrain that's half frozen, half forgotten. Catil nods toward the longhouse again. The walls are good, but you only stay in them if you have enough food, and wood, and water that isn't ice. He says this like it's all painfully obvious, and to him it is. This is when you realise the longhouse doesn't survive the winter. People survive the winter. and they drag the longhouse with them. The structure is a container, a tool. It holds their effort, their work, their warmth. But it doesn't make warmth. That's their job. Every log, every pelt, every armful of moss has to be collected, hauled, and managed. There's no set it and forget it. This isn't central heating. This is central suffering on a schedule. Historical fact for your frostbitten brain. The technique of earth insulation, covering buildings with sod, was a deliberate architectural practice used across the Norse world. Icelandic turf houses, for example, could maintain interior temperatures above freezing, even in sub-zero conditions, despite having no chimneys or masonry fireplaces. The effectiveness of these structures wasn't magic, it was layers. Always, always layers. Quirky detail. Some Viking homes were built with removable wall panels that allowed access to storage spaces within the walls themselves. That's right, secret meat compartments. Because when winter hits, nothing says prepared, like a hidden stash of dried cod behind your bedroom. And the debate? Modern historians argue over whether these building techniques were born from desperate adaptation or inherited knowledge from earlier European traditions. Did the Norse invent the turf house out of necessity? Or was it a refinement of something even older? Either way, they took it farther than most, and survived long after other frontier societies vanished. As you step back inside the longhouse, no melting in clumps off your boots, you suddenly feel it in your bones. Not just the warmth, but the intentionality of it. Every surface, every beam, every hay-stuffed shoe and fish-stuffed wall exists to trap Yixor, keep it moving and make sure it doesn't escape until the sun comes back. And now you're beginning to get it. The Norse didn't build fireplaces because they didn't need to. They were the fire. The house was the ember. The village was the flame, tucked against the wind. You don't need a clock to know when dinner's coming. Your stomach tells you first. The smell of roasting meat tells you second. And third, the longhouse slowly shifts into a ritual of preparation, not loud or hurried, but deliberate. You're getting used to this rhythm now, the slow choreography of survival where every action means something, even if that something is just don't freeze. A low fire smoulders in the centre pit, and you notice it's finally pulling its weight tonight. The air's not exactly clear, but it's breathable, which feels like a win. Still, there's no chimney. Just that same squat little smoke hole carved into the roof. The smoke drifts up in ghostly ribbons, hits the rafters, then either escapes or settles back down to sting your eyes like a passive-aggressive roommate. You sit near the fire alongside a few others, Hrolfa, Inga, a couple of small kids who've been chewing on strips of dried something for the last hour, and watch as a pot is lowered into the coals. It's a stew, you think, or a soup, or possibly both and neither. The scent is meaty, but not in a way you can immediately identify. There's a note of fish, a note of root vegetable, and something vaguely gamey, like boiled squirrel with ambition. You ask what's in it. No one answers. That's the first warning. A teenage boy eventually grins and offers you a bite of something roasted on a stick. It's dark, crispy, and smells smoky with a hint of salt. You take it. You bite. You chew. It's chewy, really chewy, like rubberized bacon but with a hint of guilt. You manage to get it down and nod politely, even though your taste buds are filing a formal complaint. It's seal, the boy says. Tough, good in winter. Then he shrugs and eats a much larger piece without blinking. You've never been more aware of how spoiled your modern taste buds are. But calories are calories, and out here, calories mean survival. They don't cook for taste. They cook for heat, energy, endurance. And that means meat, any meat, gets dried, smoked, boiled, fermented, or sometimes all of the above. You spot someone tossing a hunk of peat into the fire to keep it going. You also notice the fire pit is no bigger than a small table. It sits right in the middle of the floor, surrounded by flat stones. No chimney, no metal stove, no elaborate setup. Just rocks, a pit and fire. You've seen bigger birthday cakes, and yet this little fire does it all. Heats the stew, warms the air, dries out toast socks, and occasionally smokes out an unlucky squirrel living in the thatch. It's stubborn, finicky, and absolutely essential. But let's be real, it's not doing a great job warming the house. Not really. At best, it keeps the worst of the cold at bay. That's it. No toasty evenings by the fire here. Just one more thing standing between you and frostbite. You've been wondering why they never just built better fires. Bigger fires? Why not a stone hearth? A chimney? Something more efficient? You ask Hrolfa, who gives you the same look your grandfather gave you when you asked why his TV still has buttons. Chimneys let heat out, he says. Smoke goes out, heat follows. He gestures upward, where the smoke is curling toward the dark, soot-streaked beams. Better to choke a little than freeze. Turns out they weren't ignorant. They knew how to build chimneys. The Romans had them. Other Europeans had them. But the Norse, they made a choice. They didn't want all that hard-earned heat escaping just to make the air a little easier on the lungs. You sit with that a moment, blinking through the haze, and realise just how different the survival math is here. They didn't build for comfort. They built for conservation. You look around the room and notice something else. The rafters are black. Not dark. Black. Centuries of smoke have coated the beams in a layer of soot so thick it looks like velvet. It absorbs light. It eats shadows. It's beautiful and terrifying all at once. You wonder how much of it you've inhaled already. Probably enough to qualify as a chimney yourself. A few minutes later, Inga hands you a bowl of stew. You brace yourself. It's hot, salty and vaguely fishy. There's a root vegetable in it that tastes like turnip, and something stringy that might be dried lamb. You eat it all quickly because the warmth is more important than the taste. Historical fact for the evening: Viking homes didn't have traditional fireplaces. Instead, they relied on open central hearths without chimneys, venting smoke through smoke holes or cracks in the roof. The result was smoky, yes, but effective. Fires stayed low and slow, minimising heat loss while still allowing cooking and a little comfort. And here's your quirky twist. Soot-covered beams weren't just an unfortunate side effect. In some Norse cultures, soot was harvested, scraped down, mixed with animal fat and used as pigment for writing or painting. So yes, that ceiling grime could end up on a runestone near you. Tonight's debate? Some scholars argue the chimneyless homes weren't by design, but due to lack of resources or knowledge. Others say it was completely intentional, a low-tech, high-survival solution tailored to extreme conditions. The truth probably lives somewhere in the middle. Innovation, after all, doesn't always look like progress. Sometimes it looks like a smoky hut with a fire the size of a pizza. As dinner wraps up, the longhouse settles into that sleepy low murmur again. The fire dims, the bowls are rinsed with melted snow. People begin to crawl back into their fur piles, choosing warmth over everything else. You follow suit, stretching out near the same goat from last night, who is now firmly convinced you belong to it. As the last embers pop in the fire pit and smoke drifts lazily up into the rafters, you exhale, long and slow. It still burns your lungs a little, but not as much as before. You're adapting, slowly, smokily, one soot-filled breath at a time. You wake again, this time not to sound or movement, but to the total absence of light. Pitch. Absolute. Black. Your brain spins for a second, trying to recalibrate. Is it still night? Is it morning? Is it evening again? You blink and wave a hand in front of your face. Nothing. It's not just dark in the longhouse. It's as if the entire concept of light has gone on vacation. Welcome to Viking winter daylight hours. Approximately 4 of them, if you're lucky. And when the sun does rise, it barely clears the horizon before changing its mind and sliding back down again like a nervous turtle. You grope around for your cloak, trying not to kick someone in the ribs. The longhouse has begun to stir, but no one's in a hurry. Because why would they be? The distinction between day and night is mostly imaginary this time of year. The sun might make an appearance around midday, yawning dimly over the treetops before vanishing again, but mostly it's just twilight. All day. Every day. You finally shuffle toward the door and peek outside. The cold hits you first, then the blue. The world is painted in shades of bluish grey. Snow, sky, wood, even the breath puffing out from your nose. The light is diffused, dreamlike, as though someone dimmed the entire planet. And still, the village is alive. A few figures trudge through the snow hauling peat or firewood. Others tend to animals, shoveling frozen waste into neat piles. Life doesn't pause just because the sun can't be bothered. You step outside and stare up at the sky. No real sunrise, just a gradual undarkening. A sort of apology from the heavens that says, "This is the best I can do right now." Inga joins you, tugging her wool hood tighter around her face. "Too dark?" she asks, though it's less a question and more of a shared complaint. You nod, and she grunts. Gets better in 3 or 4 months. Then she trudges off, cheerful as someone with frost on their eyelashes can be. Inside the longhouse again, the dimness feels even heavier. Candles are rare, reserved for important moments. Most of the light comes from the fire pit, which isn't exactly doing the Lord's work in that department. You notice people working near the walls, squinting as they sew, mend, or carve by firelight that throws more shadow than glow. You think about how sunlight affects you in modern life. When it gets dark too early, you get sluggish, irritable, maybe even depressed. You suddenly understand why everyone here seems so calm, so inward-facing. There's no manic drive to do things when the sun is out, because the sun isn't out. So you adapt, you slow down, you find other ways to mark time, and yet they do have ways. You find Hrolfa sitting near the back of the longhouse, sharpening a knife with deliberate strokes. You ask him how they tell time. "We feel it," he says. You raise an eyebrow and he grins. "Not like you, no ticking, just feel when the goats need feeding, when the firewood runs low, when the stew is done. The world tells you." You try to imagine a life without hours, without clocks. Just the vague sense that morning is when it gets slightly less black, evening is when the goats get twitchy, and bedtime is when your body gives up. It's a completely different kind of time, a human kind of time. You spend part of the day outside helping Ketil repair a storage fence. The light doesn't change, the wind picks up now and then, and snow hisses across the ground like whispering ghosts. You feel untethered, no sun to orient yourself, no shadows to track, just that same blue-grey blanket over everything, like a stage lit for a dream. Back inside Papamuo, a few children are playing near the fire. Their toys are simple, carved wooden animals, bone dice, a ball of stitched-together hide. No one's keeping time, no one's telling them when to stop. There's no, "Okay, it's 3:30, time for a snack." The longhouse is like a cave filled with a low, continuous hum of life. People sleep, wake, eat, repeat. They're not waiting for the light. They are the light. Here's your historical fact. In Viking-era Scandinavia, especially in the far north, daylight during winter could shrink to just a few hours. In places like northern Norway or Iceland, the sun might not rise at all for weeks. Yet these communities thrived, adapting their daily rhythms to a life without sunlight, focusing on indoor tasks, community bonding, and mental endurance. And the quirky detail, some Viking farmers used sheep bladders filled with fish oil as makeshift lanterns. A floating wick in the oil gave off a weak but steady flame. So yes, they lit their homes with glowing sacks of animal parts. The ambience must have been incredible. Now, the scholarly debate. Did the Vikings suffer from what we now call seasonal affective disorder? Some researchers believe they were biologically better adapted to long periods of darkness, possibly due to genetic traits favouring melatonin regulation. Others argue they simply developed robust cultural coping strategies, like communal gatherings, storytelling, and intense winter rituals, to keep their spirits lit when the sun wouldn't. You settle back into the fur pile near the hearth, eyes struggling to stay open even though your body feels rested. The dimness is like a sedative wrapping you in a heavy grey fog that seeps into your bones. You've been here long enough now to feel it, not just the cold but the darkness, the way it presses in, the way it quiets the world, muffling ambition, muting anxiety. And yet somehow no one here seems panicked. No one complains that it's still dark. They just live through it, sit beside each other, stir the stew, feed the goats, sew another patch into the knees of the same trousers. They are not fighting the dark, they're living inside it. As you close your eyes again, listening to the faint rustle of furs, the pop of the fire, the murmur of voices low and soft, it finally makes sense. The light isn't gone, it's just moved inward. You don't go outside the next day, not because you're tired, though you are, but because today is food day. Not cooking food, finding food. You're not hunting or fishing, thankfully, but instead you're allowed to witness one of the most sacred, critical parts of Arctic Viking survival, the pantry. Now, let's get one thing clear up front. When you hear pantry, you might picture shelves of dry goods, tidy baskets of onions, maybe a mason jar of lentils you forgot about in 2019. That's not what's happening here. The Viking winter pantry is not neat. It's not cute. It's not even fully indoors. It's mostly a collection of pits, hooks, crates, and really cold holes in the earth where meat doesn't rot, it just freezes into submission. Inga is the one who shows you. She pulls on a sealhide coat and trudges with you out behind the longhouse, through knee-high snow and past a row of wind-carved fence posts, until you reach what looks like a small buried shrine. It's not decorated or ceremonial, just a low wooden structure, barely poking out of the ground with a roof so covered in snow you nearly miss it. She knocks once, like it's a neighbour's front door, then lifts a latch and opens it. Cold air whooshes up from below, somehow colder than the already freezing landscape. Inside there's a sunken hole, maybe 5 feet down, lined with stones and packed tight with layers of snow, sawdust and straw. She climbs halfway in and pulls out a frozen hunk of something unidentifiable and solid enough to cause blunt force trauma. "Reindeer shoulder," she says proudly, tossing it into a sack like a block of wood. You ask if they have to hunt for this every few days, and she laughs. "Hunt in winter? No, we eat what we caught before winter." And suddenly, it clicks. This isn't just storage, it's strategy. What you catch, grow, smoke, salt and dry in the warmer months becomes your lifeline when the snow walls you in. If you didn't prepare properly, you don't just go hungry, you disappear. The next cache she shows you is behind a small barn hidden under a layer of straw and stones. She kicks the covering aside and pries up a heavy plank. Beneath is another frozen pit, this one lined with bark and filled with long, thin fish wrapped in bundles of moss. They look vaguely like mummified eels. "Cod," she says. "We catch and dry it by the fjord, keeps all winter." You pick one up, and it's so light it feels hollow, like fish jerky, like edible driftwood. Apparently you rehydrate it by boiling it into soup, or just chew it until it becomes something resembling food. Back in the longhouse, the morning fire is already burning, and a few of the women are unwrapping frozen meat with bare hands like it's no big deal. Someone tosses what looks like a piece of frozen lung into a bubbling pot. A child gnaws on a dried apple, while another carefully licks a piece of ice hanging from the roof beam. You realise food isn't just sustenance here, it's time travel, a link to the better months. You think about modern refrigeration, the hum of a machine, the light that flicks on when you open the door. Here the fridge is the earth, the freezer is the air. No buttons, no backup plan, just physics and trust. Here's something even more surprising. They've stored vegetables too. Root crops like turnips and onions are buried in straw-lined boxes inside the house, tucked into corners like sleepy animals. They're dry, softening slowly with the passage of time. Every onion is a small miracle. Every turnip is a stored ray of summer sunlight. And then you spot something strange. A stone jar, sealed with what looks like leather and wax. Someone notices you eyeing it and grins. "Pickled sheep's testicles," he says, and then, dead serious, adds, "very sour." You back away slowly. Now here's the historical fact to wrap your head around. Vikings had remarkably sophisticated preservation techniques. They used salt, smoke, drying, burying, fermenting, and even pickling to ensure they didn't starve during winter months. In Iceland, some storage pits kept food preserved for years. The Earth's natural cold made it possible. No need for iceboxes or electricity. The fringe fact? In Greenland, some Norse settlers reportedly stored food in pits that were shared communally. Imagine burying a ham in the ground and trusting your neighbour not to dig it up. That's how tight-knit, or how desperate, some settlements were. A group pit, equal parts refrigerator and trust exercise. And tonight's scholarly debate. Some experts believe Norse food preservation was a patchwork of local innovation and borrowed techniques from other European societies. Others argue it developed independently through sheer environmental necessity. Either way, it's clear. The Vikings didn't just survive winter. They prepared for it with chilling efficiency. As the stew simmers over the fire, you catch a whiff of something shockingly fragrant. Herbs? Spices? No, just wild onion and dried lichen from a nearby sack. Still more. The scent is borderline luxurious after the last few nights of salt and fish-flavoured everything. Dinner is served in silence, save for a few murmurs and grunts of approval. It's good. Not just edible good, but genuinely warming. A broth that slides down your throat and lights a tiny fire in your belly. You lean back against the wall, hands wrapped around the warm bowl, and feel, for the first time, almost full. Not just in your stomach, but in your chest, like you've borrowed a little of their pride, their resilience. The snow outside keeps falling. The darkness thickens like a second layer of skin. But tonight, the fire burns brighter, the stew tastes better, and the longhouse hums with the quiet sound of people who've learned how to survive not by fighting winter, but by feeding themselves enough to face it again tomorrow. It's late when they offer you the shark, You've already sat through a surprisingly enjoyable meal of stewed reindeer with a hint of something vaguely green and edible. You were considering crawling back under your furs and pretending you didn't exist. But then Hrolfr appears in front of you, holding out a small wooden dish, and says with a perfectly straight face, "Try this, special." You look down and immediately wish you hadn't. It's a few cubes of meat, greyish, damp-looking, and glistening slightly, like they've been sweating out their own opinions. The smell hits you a moment later, sharp, acidic, and somehow fishy and chemical at the same time, like ammonia met low tide and decided to get experimental. You look up at Hrolfr. He's smiling. That alone is a bad sign. Inga is across the fire, grinning. "Hakal," she says, like she's naming a beloved uncle. "Fermented shark, very strong, very healthy." You glance around, expecting someone to shout, "Just kidding!" But no one does. This is not a prank. This is a delicacy. You pick up a cube between your fingers and bring it closer to your mouth, and the smell gets worse. You hesitate. Someone starts a slow clap. You're not sure if it's supportive or mocking. You shove the cube into your mouth and chew, and instantly regret every decision you've made in your entire life. The taste is not a taste. It's a sensation, like licking a sweaty boot that's been soaking in cleaning fluid. Your eyes water, your throat clenches, your brain screams, but your body knows better. Swallow or die. You gulp it down with the dramatic flair of someone jumping into a frozen lake. The room erupts in laughter. "Good, yes?" Hrolfr says, completely deadpan. You cough and nod. "Very fresh," you manage. Fermented shark is more than just food, it's tradition. And in the Norse Arctic winter, tradition is half the reason people stay sane. It turns out the Vikings had a whole menu of preserved delicacies, designed not for flavour, but for function. Shark, of course, couldn't be eaten fresh. Greenland shark contains toxins that will wreck your nervous system. So instead, they buried it in gravel for several weeks and then let it rot gently in the open air. Because sure, why not? You're handed a cup of something to chase it down. It's a bitter brew, more medicine than drink, brewed from herbs and roots and possibly vengeance. It clears your sinuses and dulls the pain in your throat. A woman named Aslao pats you on the back. "Now you're Viking," she says, smiling like you just passed your final exam. You try to process what just happened, but the room is already moving on. More food appears, dried fish, slices of cured lamb, pickled root vegetables so sour they make your jaw ache. One of the children is chewing happily on a hunk of whale blubber like it's a fruit roll-up. No one complains. No one acts like this is strange. It's not strange, it's necessary. That's when you realise winter food isn't about flavour. It's about survival. Preservation. Calories. You don't cook for pleasure, you cook for fuel. Every dish is an answer to a problem. How do we keep meat from rotting? How do we store fat through the dark months? How do we make something last when nothing grows? Hrolfr explains how they smoke meat over slow-burning fires with herbs, not for taste, really, but to keep flies away. How they salt fish until it's too dry to chew without soaking, but it never spoils. How they pack butter in birch bark and store it underground until spring. You think back to your own fridge. The labels, the expiration dates, the security of knowing you can replace anything with a 5-minute trip to the store. Here, everything is irreplaceable. If you lose it, you don't eat. And if you don't eat, you don't last the winter. Here's your historical fact. Hakal, the infamous fermented shark dish, has its roots in necessity. The Greenland shark is toxic when fresh due to high levels of urea and trimethylamine oxide, but the Vikings learned to neutralize it by burying the meat and allowing it to ferment. It's still eaten in Iceland today, often served with a strong spirit called brennivine, a nickname Black Death, to help it go down. Now for the fringe fact. There's evidence some Viking communities used fermented dairy, cheese and even soured milk stored in animal stomachs, as portable protein. Some of it was so sour it was considered an appetite suppressant. Imagine carrying a bag of yogurt that could double as a weapon. That's Viking snacking. And tonight's scholarly debate. Did the Norse develop fermentation and preservation independently, or borrow it through contact with Celts, Slavs and others? While similar food preservation methods existed across ancient Europe, the Arctic versions pushed the boundaries using volcanic vents, glacier caves and salt marshes in creative ways. Some argue it was innovation, others sheer desperation. As you sit with a stomach that's half numb and half afraid of what's coming next, you begin to appreciate the quiet resilience baked into every bite. The willingness to eat what no one else would, the defiant creativity, the brutal efficiency. You might not want another cube of hakal ever again, but you respect the hell out of it. The fire dies down to coals, casting the longhouse in a flickering amber haze. Around you, people yawn, stretch, and settle back into their fur nests. A few snores begin. A goat wanders past, nudges your leg, and flops down beside you. You pull your cloak tight and lie back, the taste of ammonia shark still lingering faintly on your breath. It's horrible, it's unforgettable, it's tradition, and somehow in the middle of all this cold, all this dark, all this madness, you're starting to feel full. You've been warned ahead of time. Hrolfa gives you a look, half serious, half gleeful, and says, "Tonight, you bathe." You think, okay, great, finally. The smoke, the sweat, the ever-present tang of goat, maybe now you'll come out the other side smelling less like a fur-lined chimney. But no one tells you what bathing actually means here until you're already ankle-deep in snow, trudging toward what looks like a moss-covered mound at the edge of the settlement. The door is small, barely wide enough to crawl through, and as you step inside it's like entering another planet. A wave of thick, wet heat slams into your face, fogging your eyes, filling your lungs. The walls are stone, low and beaded with condensation. Steam rises from a wide, shallow pit in the centre, where rocks, blackened and cracked, glow faintly red under a thin layer of water. A woman tosses another ladle of water onto them, and the room hisses like an angry serpent. This is the bad stover, the Viking steam bath. No soaps, no lavender scrubs, just fire, rock, water and sweat. You're handed a ladle and pointed toward a bench. And then, in the most unceremonious way possible, people start stripping down. Let's pause here. You've been mentally preparing to bathe, yes, but you are not prepared to be naked with strangers in a steamy cave while someone pours boiling water onto rocks 3 feet from your toes. But you realise quickly that modesty is a luxury people drop when it's kuntundergeet outside and frostbite is a real threat. This isn't a spa, it's a system, a rhythm. You shed your layers, slowly, regretfully, and step onto the bench, gripping a wooden ladle like it's your only defence against the creeping vulnerability of your own unclothed self. Someone hands you a bundle of twigs, birch branches tied together. Hit yourself, they say. Good for skin. You do. Lightly at first, then more confidently. It feels absurd and oddly satisfying. The skin prickles. Blood returns to places it hasn't visited in days. The steam fills your head. Your pores open like blooming moss. Your lungs burn a little, but it's a welcome kind of burn. You haven't felt this clean since ever, actually. Not this kind of clean, not earth clean. You're sweating out the soot, the smoke, the strange, unspoken heaviness of cold. And then Hrolfa stands up, nods and says, "Time for cold." You don't ask what that means because you already know, and your body is already screaming no. The exit is fast, the cold is faster. You burst through the low door, barefoot, wet, steaming like a roast chicken. Snow hits your feet, then your legs, then your lungs. You stagger. You shout. You may or may not curse every Norse god you've ever heard of, and then you dive into a snowdrift. Because apparently that's what you do after steaming your soul out of your body. Everything goes numb in 2 seconds. Then it starts to tingle. Then you feel more alive than you ever have. Your heart is pounding so hard it echoes in your ears. Your skin burns with cold and memory and something almost like joy. You look up at the sky, clear for once, stars blinking down at you like distant fires, and laugh. You don't mean to, it just escapes. A bark of disbelief and exhilaration. This is the reset button. You go back inside the bathhouse, dripping and grinning, and rejoin the others. No one says anything. They just nod as if to say, "Good, you didn't die." Later, wrapped in dry wool and curled back near the longhouse fire, you sip hot broth while your skin still glows faintly from the ordeal. You're not clean in the modern sense. Your hair still feels like hay and your nails still look like they've been in a fistfight with a shovel. But something in you is scrubbed raw, rebalanced. Here's the historical fact. Norse bathhouses were real and widespread. Archaeological evidence from settlements in Iceland, Greenland, and even parts of Norway shows that steam baths were part of regular life, even in the coldest months. Some were built near geothermal springs, others heated with fire-warmed stones. Cleanliness wasn't just practical, it was spiritual, ritual, social. The quirky fact, In some Icelandic bathhouses, people left offerings, coins, carved bones, herbs, around the stones for luck or protection. Bathing wasn't just about hygiene, it was seen as a kind of purification ritual, a way to reconnect body and spirit when the world outside was frozen over. And the open debate, how often did Vikings really bathe? Some say once a week was standard, especially in Iceland, where geothermal energy made baths more accessible. Others argue it was far less frequent in mainland settlements due to firewood scarcity. Still, the mere existence of bathhouses in winter says something radical. Even when the world is buried in snow, people still made time to feel clean, to feel human. You lean back, furs tucked around your shoulders, and let the warmth sink in. Your body feels like it belongs to you again. The longhouse smells slightly less offensive now, or maybe you're just numb to it. Either way, you understand why these people make the effort. Why even when fuel is precious and time is short, they carve out a place to sweat and shiver and remember what warmth really feels like. Outside, the snow falls softly, slowly, like feathers from a sleeping sky, and inside you feel new. You're still glowing faintly from the bathhouse incident when you realise something's shifting inside the longhouse. The usual rhythm, the murmured conversations, the low clatter of tools, the gentle coughing and occasional goat noise, is changing. There's a buzz in the air now, like static before a storm, except instead of lightning, it's celebration. People begin to move with purpose, furs are shaken out, ale barrels are rolled in from the cold, Hrolfa and Idis talk in hushed tones near the hearth, and someone's cleaning the soot off a carved wooden idol of Thor that normally just lurks unnoticed in the corner. You're not sure what's happening, but it's big. And, as usual, no one's explaining it to you. So you ask Inga, who's stacking bundles of kindling with more focus than usual. She looks up, surprised. "Midwinter's night," she says. "Tonight we honour the gods." You raise an eyebrow. You've been here long enough to know honour can mean anything from quiet prayer to animal sacrifice to dancing in your underwear in the snow. She sees the concern on your face and grins. "There will be mead and songs and meat." Then more seriously, "And we ask for survival." It hits you then, this isn't just a party, it's a plea, a ritual carved into the frostbitten bones of this place, because winter, no matter how well you prepare, is still a gamble. No one's immune, and tonight is the night they look up at the black sky and ask the old gods, "Please let us live until spring." By late afternoon, though honestly it still looks like midnight, the longhouse has transformed. Animal hides have been draped over the beams, the floor's been swept with bundles of birch twigs, the fire pit is roaring hotter than usual, and someone's hung herbs and bones above it in patterns you don't recognise. You try asking what they mean. The answer? Protection, maybe luck. You help hang a few things, mostly decorative. Bells made from bits of carved bone, small wooden animal carvings. It feels festive, yes, but also heavy with intent. Every item has a story. Every placement is deliberate. You feel like a guest at a dinner party hosted by ancient ghosts. Then comes the food. You've been here long enough to know the normal winter meals are humble, functional, calorie-dense affairs. Not tonight. Tonight, they bring out the real food. Smoked lamb ribs, boiled grains spiced with what you think is angelica root, roast duck fattened during the last days of autumn. And yes, mead. The good kind, sweet and heady and served in carved wooden cups that still bear the teeth marks of past celebrants. You sit cross-legged on a fur between Hrolfa and a teenager named Bjorn, who's already had too much mead and is slurring praises to Odin between gulps. Everyone eats with both hands, no shame, no ceremony. Meat is torn, broth is slurped, laughter breaks out in the middle of chewing. It's messy, loud, human, and beneath it all is a hum of tension you can't quite place. After the food comes the fire rituals. Someone dims the central flames down to coals and a horned man steps forward. Not horned in a costume way. He's wearing a literal horned cap made from some animal you don't want to meet. He's the Godi, a kind of priest. You'd seen him before, just another villager. Now, in the flickering firelight, he seems older, bigger, darker. He begins to chant, not in song, not in speech, but something in between. Low, rhythmic, ancient. Others join in slowly, voices weaving together, like threads in a frayed rope. They sing of Thor who brings the storm, of Odin who knows the cost of wisdom, of Freya who brings the spring eventually. You don't know the words, but you feel the shape of them. Longing, respect, hope, maybe even fear. Then someone places a carved wooden bowl into the fire pit, and a thick plume of scented smoke rises. It smells like resin, pine, dried herbs, and something sweetly sour. The smoke curls and twists, filling the air with a kind of thick silence. One by one, people toss offerings into the fire. Bones, bits of fur, silver trinkets, coins, even food. You watch as Inga tosses in a carved comb. Hrolfr drops a small rock wrapped in cloth. You ask what it was. A piece of my brother's grave, and he says, like it's no big deal. They offer these things not as bribes, but as messages, symbols, reminders to the gods, and maybe to themselves that they're still here, still waiting for the sun to return, still worthy of life. Here's your historical fact. Midwinter festivals were a real part of Norse culture, known in Old Norse as Jol, from which we get Yule. These celebrations predated Christianity and involved feasting, ritual toasts, bló, and honouring the gods for protection and good fortune. Some customs included lighting a central fire to symbolise the returning sun. Your quirky fact? In some Viking households, they carved sun wheels, circular wooden discs with spokes, and placed them near the hearth during winter festivals to symbolically invite back the sun. They weren't just partying, they were pleading with the universe in the language of symbols and flame. And the debate? Some scholars argue these rituals were deeply religious. Others think they were mostly psychological, structured distractions to break up the bleak monotony of Arctic darkness. But maybe both are true. Maybe when the night never ends, the line between faith and survival gets blurry, and later that night, as the fire burns low and the songs wind down into slow, sleepy hums, you sit in the thick warmth of the longhouse and feel something you didn't expect. Awe. Not of the gods necessarily, but of the people, their endurance, their creativity, their insistence on joy, even when the world outside is nothing but ice and shadow. You fall asleep with a full stomach, ears still ringing with song, the smell of pine smoke in your nose. You dream of fire and snow, of gods in furs, of spring struggling to be born through a frozen sky. And for the first time maybe, you believe it'll come. The next few days bleed together, one long blur of frost and smoke and slow hours. There's a strange rhythm to Viking winter life once you settle into it. A low gear of existence that hums just loud enough to keep your mind busy, but not so fast that time has any meaning. Days don't feel like days. They feel like stretches of in-between. You wake up, do something that vaguely resembles work, eat a bowl of something cool and warm, and go back to the same sleeping furs before your mind has time to question the point. What do people do all day when they can't leave the house without freezing their nostrils shut? You find out the answer pretty quickly. They make things. Constantly. Every idle hand in the longhouse becomes a tool. Whittling, carving, sewing, weaving, braiding rope, fixing shoes, mending clothing, sharpening blades, repairing handles, patching sails, anything that keeps the hands moving and the brain from chewing on itself. You sit beside Inga one morning as she repairs a cloak. Her fingers move automatically, stitching through thick wool with a curved bone needle. The light from the fire hits the thread just enough to catch it glinting like wire. She doesn't look down once. You ask how long it took her to learn. She shrugs. Before I could walk, I think, then she smirks. Winter has always been school. Nearby, Bjorn is carving a fish out of driftwood. It doesn't serve a purpose, at least not a practical one, but his hands are busy, his eyes are focused, and his humming keeps the silence from swallowing the room. Someone's weaving cordage in the corner. Another is braiding hair. Not out of vanity, but because it keeps it from freezing into knots later. You try your hand at a few things. They hand you a cracked spoon to sand smooth, then a length of wool to twist into thread. Your fingers cramp fast. Your patience fails faster. But it's not about speed. It's about continuity. Moving, making, repeating. The tools here aren't just physical, they're mental. Without them, winter becomes a trap. The children are just as busy. When they're not sent outside to run lapped in the snow for warmth or to check the goats or fetch water, they're taught to work. Tiny needles for tiny hands, carving practice with dull blades. Even the toys they play with become lessons. A wooden horse, learn to carve. A doll, learn to sew. Even the games involve strategy, counting, patience. The longhouse is their school, their world, and their shelter all rolled into one. And the boredom? Oh, it's real. You can see it in the shifting eyes of the teenagers, the sighs between tasks, the way a few people stare long into the fire, like they're trying to remember what sunlight looked like. One man, older, sharp-eyed, tells you flat out, the dark doesn't kill you, the waiting does. That's when the stories start. It's late. The fire has sunk into glowing coals. The wind howls outside like a thing made of teeth. And Hrolfr, half drunk on mead and meat, begins to speak. He tells a story of Loki, the trickster god, who once cut off a goddess's hair just to see what would happen. Of Thor smashing mountains with his hammer. Of a giant who drank the sea and thought it was mead. The kids gather close, their eyes wide, their bodies huddled like nesting dolls under shared furs. Adults listen too, smiling, muttering corrections, adding sound effects, debating details. The longhouse becomes something else in those moments, not just a shelter, but a theatre, a temple, a time machine. You don't need sunlight when you've got stories like this. They stretch across hours, across centuries. They're alive, passed hand to mouth, parent to child like fire. And you just listen, eyes half closed, brain softening like snow under warm boots. You get it now, why myths matter, why voices need to fill the dark, not to push it away, but to make it feel full instead of empty. Here's your historical fact. In Viking society, winters were seen as prime time for storytelling and oral tradition. With so much of their culture unwritten, these long months were when sagas were shared, remembered, embellished and passed down. Skalds, professional poets, held a special place in Norse communities, preserving not just entertainment but history, lore and moral lessons. Now for the fringe detail, there's some evidence that narrative games were played. Structured, competitive storytelling sessions where someone would begin a tale and others had to continue it, one by one, without breaking logic or tone. Lose the thread? You lost the game. In some households, losers had to do the worst chores for a week. So yes, winter boredom led directly to the invention of improv sagas. And tonight's scholarly debate. Were these indoor months truly a time of creativity and bonding, or was that a luxury only for the well-fed? Some historians argue that winter was a living hell for the poor, crowded, unsanitary, filled with tension and illness. Others suggest that hardship bred stronger social cohesion, and that the stories, songs, and shared tasks were precisely how people avoided breaking under pressure. Probably both are true, depending on how well your salted fish stash was holding out. You lie down again, this time beneath a heavier fur than usual. Your fingers are sore from whittling. Your ears are still ringing with the last tale Hrolfr told, the one where a man marries a bear disguised as a woman and wakes up with frostbite and regrets. As the fire dies, the longhouse breathes its slow, smoky breath. You close your eyes. There's no light outside, no noise but wind and the faint creak of wood settling into the frost. But inside, the silence isn't empty. It's full of stories. You've given up on knowing what day it is. Even the idea of morning and evening has melted into this long, dreamlike smear of dim light and darker dark, broken only by meals and chores and the occasional accidental nap that turns into a full night's sleep. Without clocks, without sunlight, without anything that screams structure, time here flows more like smoke. Slow, curling and impossible to grasp. You try asking Hrolfr what day it is. He just shrugs and says, "One closer to spring." Which is both comforting and horrifying. You're not the only one struggling with it. Around the fire you notice people drifting in and out of tasks like they're walking through molasses. Someone's carving a spoon for the third time this week. Another woman keeps rechecking the same net for holes that were never there. Even the goats look confused, bleating at odd hours and eating snow like it owes them money. And then there's the light, or lack of it. Today, you get a rare glimpse of something that could almost be called sun. For about 30 minutes around what might be midday, the sky turns a soft silver, not bright, but less dark. Shadows return briefly, stretching long and blue across the snow. A few people step outside just to stand in it, like it's warmth itself. You do too. You turn your face upward, close your eyes and feel, well, not heat exactly, but presence. Proof that the sun still exists, still cares just a little. And then it's gone again, like someone flicked off the switch and left you in the cold. That's when you learn about timekeeping the Viking way. Forget sundials, they're useless here for months. Forget hourglasses, no one has the luxury of wasting sand. Out here, time is marked by routine, by tasks, by changes in temperature, hunger, or the way smoke moves through the longhouse. Adis shows you her method. She keeps a thick knot of braided cord by her bed, with beads woven in at intervals. Each bead, she says, for a task or prayer. She touches one. Firewood, another. Animals, another. Evening meal. It's not a clock, it's a rhythm. And she doesn't count hours, she counts the world around her. Others mark time in different ways. One man tracks the wax drips on a single candle. A woman places stones near the hearth and moves them slightly after each completed chore. A boy scratches tally marks into the beam near his bed, 25 and counting, though he's started drawing little animals between them out of boredom or madness. You ask how they know when it's time to do anything. The answer is always the same. We just know. You don't. At least not yet. Your internal clock is fried. You're tired when you wake up and alert when everyone else sleeps. Your body craves the bright, scheduled world it came from, alarms, deadlines, daylight. But slowly, painfully, you're learning to trust something older. Your stomach becomes a clock. Your fingers, sore from use, tell you when it's time to rest. The rhythm of chores, of feeding animals, of stoking the fire, all of it becomes a kind of pulse, not mechanical, biological. And you start to notice that in the quiet of the longhouse time feels different. Slower, yes, but also more present. When there's no rush, no bells or dings or calendar alerts, you begin to feel each moment instead of racing through it. You spend a long afternoon, or maybe it's morning, helping Inga dye wool with lichens and ashes. The process is slow and quiet. Mix, stir, wait. Let the fibres soak. Pull them out, hang them. Wait again. No one rushes, no one even talks much. But the work gets done. Time moves, not in ticks, but in tides. Later you sit by the fire and carve lines into a block of wood, your own calendar maybe, or a piece of something that feels like sanity. You don't know what day it is. You don't even know if it matters. But for the first time, you're not counting down, you're just counting. Here's your historical fact. Viking societies didn't have mechanical clocks. Instead, they used natural time markers, sunlight, moon cycles, seasonal shifts, and communal routines. Some used primitive sundials in warmer months, called solskugafjöl, literally sun shadow board. But in winter, such tools were useless, and time became a social construct more than a mechanical one. Now for the quirky bit, there's evidence that some Norse households used time lamps, oil lamps marked with notches or tied cords to indicate how long they had burned. A kind of candle clock without a clock. One archaeologist even suggested that certain carved bones with dots may have been personal timekeepers, literal bone calendars. The scholarly debate. Was Viking timekeeping structured or improvisational? Some experts argue that ritual and tradition offered more consistency than modern timekeeping ever could. Others believe the chaos of Arctic winters led to mental strain and social disorganization. Was the Norse mind adaptable or simply numb? You sit by the fire long after the others have gone to sleep, the glow casting warped shadows up the beam. You stare at the embers and wonder how long it's been since you last saw a clock. A calendar. Anything with numbers. And then you realise you don't miss them. Here, time isn't something you track, it's something you inhabit. You pull your furs tighter, stretch out on the sleeping platform, and close your eyes. Somewhere in the back of your mind, the modern world still ticks and tocks away. But it's distant, faint, like a voice down a long tunnel. And here in the dark, your heartbeat is enough. You can't help but laugh the first time you see it. Two kids sliding full speed down a snow-covered hill on a flat piece of bone. One of them is screaming with joy, the other looks like he's preparing for death. And neither has any intention of stopping before they slam into the pile of firewood at the bottom, which they do, with a crunch. And then they both roll over, laugh hysterically, and start dragging the bone sled back uphill. This isn't what you expected from Viking childhood in the Arctic. You pictured something more solemn, more grim. Children solemnly sharpening knives by firelight or carrying buckets of goat urine through snowdrifts, not wiping snot off their faces and hurtling into solid wood like tiny lunatics. And yet, here they are, making winter their playground. Idis sees you watching and smirks. Better they break an arm now than their necks later. That's the Viking parenting philosophy in one sentence. It turns out that, yes, Viking kids worked. Hard. They carried water, helped mend clothing, fed animals, scraped hides, prepared meals, and tended to younger siblings, while their parents prepared for the next disaster. But they also played. Not with toys like you know them, Jin, but with whatever was around, carved sticks, bone dice, bits of driftwood, and apparently the laws of physics. You join a group of children building a snow fort. It's not just for fun. They're preparing for a snowball battle with another group across the longhouse. You try to help build a wall, only to get ambushed by 3 kids with surprisingly well-packed projectiles. The snow stings your face. Your dignity takes a hit. But you're laughing before you can even catch your breath. Inside the longhouse there's less chaos but just as much creativity. A girl is carving runes into a strip of bark. Another boy is twisting goat sinew into string, his tongue sticking out in concentration. They chatter in bursts of Old Norse, but even without understanding you catch the rhythm. Jokes, dares, dramatic retellings of things that happened 5 minutes ago. They aren't just surviving the winter, they're growing up in it. You ask Inga what it's like raising children in the cold months. She doesn't hesitate. They get stronger, or they don't. Winter teaches fast. It sounds brutal, but not cruel. There is no room here for softness that doesn't serve a purpose, no. No helicopter parenting, no hand-wringing over scraped knees. A child who learns how to keep warm, who to trust, how to find dry firewood. That's a child who might live to see the thaw. Later you watch a small boy, maybe 5, dragging a piece of meat across the floor, muttering instructions to a dog that clearly outranks him socially. He's not being coddled or corrected, just watched, observed, allowed to fail or succeed on his own terms, and somehow he does. You remember something Adi said earlier? We don't raise children, we prepare them. There's a difference, and it runs deep here. In the Arctic, your childhood isn't an escape from responsibility. It's the slow, painful, joyful process of learning how not to die. And yet, not everything is rough edges and discipline. At night, when the chores are done and the wind howls outside like a hungry beast, the kids gather close to their parents and curl up into shared nests of fur and warmth. You see a mother gently combing lice from her daughter's hair, singing a low lullaby that makes your chest ache even though you don't know the words. A father carves a little figure for his son and hands it over like it's treasure. These aren't moments of luxury, they're survival mechanisms made tender. Because winter doesn't just freeze the world. It presses in day after day, shrinking your entire life down to a few square meters and the people inside them. And in that closeness, even the smallest gestures become massive. A shared joke, a warm hand, a new pair of socks. Here's your historical fact. Viking children, especially in rural settlements, were expected to begin contributing to household survival from as young as 4 or 5. Tasks were assigned based on strength and maturity, and play often mirrored adult responsibilities. Still, play was essential, not just for joy, but for learning. Archaeological finds include carved animals, toy swords, sleds, and simple musical instruments, all likely made for or by children. The quirky fact: Norse sagas often include child prodigies, tiny warriors, wise little girls, kids who outwit adults with clever tricks. Whether myth or mirror, these tales suggest that even the youngest were valued not just as future adults, but as full members of the community. One story even tells of a boy who killed a wolf with a sharpened spoon. Is it true? Who knows? But it feels true. And the scholarly debate? Some historians argue that Viking childhood was short, harsh, and mostly devoid of affection. Others suggest that while discipline was firm, children were deeply loved and integrated into family life in ways modern societies might envy. Without institutions like schools or daycare, kids spent nearly every waking hour with their extended families. And that closeness shaped them. By the time evening comes, the kids are spent. You watch one little girl, maybe 7, curl up next to her grandmother, pulling a blanket of sheepskin over both of them. Another boy crawls under the bench with the dog and immediately starts snoring. Even the goat seems too tired to bother them. You settle into your own fur pile, watching the flicker of firelight dance across soot-streaked beams, and realise how differently you're starting to see the longhouse. It's not just a smoky bunker full of tough survivors. It's a living thing filled with love and arguments and children with wet boots and chapped lips who will someday grow into the people leading rituals, telling stories, building houses, and maybe, just maybe, making it through a few more winters, because here childhood isn't sheltered from the cold, it grows through it. You can't ignore it anymore, the smell. Not the smoky woolen people musk that clings to your clothes, or even the faint undertone of fermented shark lingering from the last feast. No, this one's sharper, earthier, more animal. and it's been intensifying with every passing day until finally, with a subtle but undeniable shift in your surroundings, you realise the truth. Half the longhouse is not for people, it's for animals. You knew this intellectually, of course. You'd seen the goats wandering around, had your feet stepped on by a sheep or two. But now it sinks in fully. The longhouse isn't divided into separate rooms, it's a dual-purpose machine. On one end, human survival, on the other, livestock survival. And the line between those two? Blurred by necessity, you decide to venture into their side. The moment you cross the invisible boundary, just a slightly lower beam and a not-so-subtle drop in floor cleanliness, the air thickens. It's warmer, surprisingly, more humid. It smells like straw, manure, damp fur, and something like sour milk in a wet boot. The goats stare at you with their judgmental eyes. The sheep just chew endlessly. In the corner, 2 cows lie curled together, enormous and peaceful, steam rising from their bodies as if they're their own central heating units. Ketil, who's elbow deep in what appears to be cow maintenance, waves you over. "Careful where you step," he mutters. The floor bites. You look down, slippery straw, hoof prints, and something that squishes uncomfortably under your boot. He wasn't joking. "This is where the real heat is," he says, patting one of the cows on its side. "They're better than a fire." And he's right. The animal room, this muddy living barn, is several degrees warmer than the rest of the longhouse. It's not cosy exactly, but it's unmistakably alive. The body heat from a dozen animals trapped inside an earthen building? That's biomass at work. The Vikings might not have invented central heating, but they did find a way to snuggle it. You sit on an overturned bucket, trying not to breathe too deeply, and watch Ketil milk one of the cows. The milk is warm, steaming in the cold air. He hands you a wooden cup filled to the brim. You sniff it. Fresh milk, unpasteurized, probably crawling with bacteria. You drink it anyway. It tastes shockingly rich, and you suddenly understand why this liquid gold was so guarded through the winter. Animals weren't just warmth or food, they were status, protection, even a kind of spiritual presence. Every one of them represented effort, foresight, survival. If a cow died midwinter, it wasn't just sad, it was catastrophic. You learn that the animals are brought in during late autumn and stay until spring. Yes, they poop inside. Yes, they sometimes panic or escape or give birth in the middle of the night while someone's trying to sleep 2 meters away. But they're part of the household now, part of the team. No one here lives above their animals. They live with them. It's humbling. You're sharing space not just with people, but with creatures who give milk, wool, meat, warmth. You watch a girl gently brushing ice out of a goat's fur, humming about under her breath. A boy carefully replaces straw under a limping sheep. There's no disdain here. No us and them. Only warmth and the things that produce it. Back on the human side of the house, Adis explains how careful they are about placement. Cows near the middle wall, goats at the edge, chickens. We keep in cages, they peck. You laugh. She doesn't. They peck, she repeats, dead serious. You help scoop straw later, clear out waste, and add a new layer of dried moss along the floor to keep the worst smells in check. It's not glamorous, but it's oddly satisfying. You're learning that survival isn't just fire and fur, it's maintenance, and animals need a lot of it. Still, it's not without challenges. Disease spreads fast in these tight quarters. One cough from a sick goat can turn into a full-blown crisis. Food must be rationed not just for people, but for every beast inside. And water, always cold, always scarce, is hauled bucket by bucket from a frozen stream, often requiring you to chop through several inches of ice first. There are no days off. Here's your historical fact. Viking longhouses were often shared spaces, animals and humans cohabiting through winter. The layout varied, but many houses had animals occupying 1/3 of the structure, usually at the lower end for better drainage. Archaeological evidence from Norse farms in Iceland and Greenland shows clearly partitioned yet connected spaces for livestock, essential for maintaining warmth and food supplies during months when going outside was dangerous. Now for the quirky detail. In some Icelandic households, people slept above the livestock area on elevated platforms or lofts, not for safety, though that was a bonus, but for warmth. Rising heat from the cows below made the sleeping platforms the warmest spots in the entire building. You might call it the original heated floors, just with more mooing. And the scholarly debate? Some argue that cohabitation was a clever solution to cold and scarcity. Others think it was a desperation tactic, the last resort of those with too few resources to build separate barns. but modern reconstructions suggest it was a conscious design choice, a kind of ecological heating system with built-in breakfast. That night, as you settle into your now familiar sleeping furs, you find yourself closer to the wall than usual, closer to the livestock. You can hear them breathing, shifting, sighing. The low living sounds are oddly comforting. The goat even bleats once, as if to check you're still there. You are, and for once, you don't mind the smell. It begins with a cough, a single rasping hack in the darkness that echoes louder than it should. Then another, from someone on the far end of the longhouse. A child sniffles. Someone sneezes hard enough to wake a chicken. You sit up slowly, rubbing the crust of smoke and sleep from your eyes. It's colder than usual, the air heavy and sour. Your throat burns. Illness. It moves like fog in these tight quarters. Quiet, creeping, impossible to keep out. And once it arrives, you realise just how vulnerable the Vikings were, even wrapped in furs and seasoned by the cold. They could outsmart the weather, outlast the hunger. But sickness? Sickness didn't play by the rules. By morning, 3 people are coughing hard. Adis makes the call. The sick must be separated. Not outside, said of course, that's a death sentence. Instead, they're moved to the least trafficked end of the longhouse, behind a row of crates and furs hung like makeshift curtains. You help string them up, your fingers stiff with cold, your breath visible. It doesn't feel like protection, it feels like surrender. The infected are wrapped in extra layers, given out a warm broth and slushy onion poultices that smell worse than the goat pen. You ask Inga what's in the mixture and she shrugs. Moss, bile, root. It worked on my sister once. That seems to be the logic behind most of their remedies, anecdotal evidence mixed with blind optimism and a pinch of ritual. One man lies on his side, shivering under a fur pelt, sweat glistening on his brow despite the frigid air. You help hold his head while someone trickles a spoonful of honey water into his mouth. For the lungs, they say. Another person brings over dried mushrooms crushed into a thick paste. You don't ask what kind. Some cures don't come with explanations. There's no doctor, no medicine cabinet, no thermometer to tell you how bad it is, just the knowledge passed down from mothers and grandmothers, what herbs to use, what bark to chew, what prayers to whisper when the fever spikes. Healing here isn't sterile, it's messy, desperate, and more spiritual than scientific. You start noticing the signs of effort everywhere, dried bundles of yarrow and thyme hanging from beams, bark stored in small clay jars, charcoal ground and mixed with fat for poultices. The healers, usually women, though not always, work constantly, not just when someone's sick, but long before. Every summer herb picked, every root stored is part of the winter defence. And yet, even with all that effort, the longhouse feels vulnerable now. The air carries the weight of uncertainty. People move slower, quieter. Conversations drop into whispers. When someone coughs too hard, eyes flick toward them like wolves watching a limping deer. You begin to understand why some Viking graves contain so few old bones. Not because they didn't honour their elders, but because not everyone made it that far. Winters were long, illness relentless. There was no modern immune system cushioned by antibiotics and annual checkups. You got sick, you either recovered or you didn't. Simple as that. To pass the time and avoid breathing in too deeply, you help grind dried plants into powder. A strange blend of moss, dried berries, pine resin, and something that smells like tree bark and regret. You help brew it into tea. It's bitter. It makes your tongue go slightly numb, but everyone drinks it. That night, a ritual. Not a big feast like midwinters, but a small, quiet ceremony near the fire. Hrolfa speaks words in a low voice you can't understand, touching a small carved talisman to the forehead of each sick person. Inga sprinkles ash in a circle around the bedding. You don't ask if it's meant to keep spirits out or sickness in, maybe both. Here's your historical fact. Vikings didn't have a formal medical system, but they did have leknir, healers who used a mix of herbs, rituals and experience to treat illness. Common treatments included teas made from yarrow, angelica and juniper, salves from animal fat mixed with charcoal, and bloodletting in rare cases. Fevers and rare respiratory illnesses were common in winter due to poor ventilation and close quarters. And the quirky fact? Viking cure charms were a thing. Little runes or poems carved into sticks, bones or stones, believed to hold healing magic. Some were even meant to be swallowed or buried beneath the patient's bed. One particularly strange recipe involved boiling garlic in cow urine and applying it to wounds. It might have actually worked. Science is still deciding. Now for the scholarly debate. Were Viking medical practices mostly effective herbalism or more like superstition? Some historians argue that their remedies were grounded in genuine empirical knowledge, passed through generations and honed by necessity. Others say it was mostly symbolic, a way to comfort the sick when hope was slim. The truth probably lies in the overlap. By morning, one of the children is better. She's still coughing, but her eyes are brighter, and she asks for broth. Hope flickers in the longhouse like the fire, small but warm. But another man, the one with the shaking hands and fevered breath, worsens. You hold his cup, you wipe his brow, you learn what care really looks like when all you have is a cloth and your own 2 hands. You lie awake that night, listening to the coughs across the room, the steady breathing of animals, the endless howl of the wind pressing against the walls like it's looking for a way in. And you realise you're not afraid of the cold anymore. You're afraid of what happens when the warmth runs out. The first thing you notice is the quiet. Not the usual hush of a snow-covered world, but something deeper, more total. You step outside the longhouse early, so early in fact that time seems to fold in on itself. The cold is sharp enough to bite the inside of your nose, but your ears are what really catch your attention. They're straining, trying to find something, anything beyond your own heartbeat, and the faint crunch of snow beneath your boots. There's nothing. No wind, no birds, no distant rustle of trees. The world has gone mute, and in that silence you hear it. The hum. It's not loud, it doesn't announce itself. It's the kind of sound that makes you question whether you're actually hearing it or just imagining something to fill the void. But it's there, low, distant, almost like a throat singing in reverse, a deep vibration that seems to come from the ground itself. You pause, hold your breath, it's still there. Catil appears beside you, stomping the snow from his boots, and you ask him, half joking, if the earth is singing. He doesn't laugh. That's the ice, he says, serious, talking to itself. You've heard about this. Ice can moan, creak, even roar as it shifts. Snow can settle with a sound like breath. Frozen rivers groan under their own weight. But this is something stranger, like the land is whispering in its sleep. As you listen, you realise that Arctic silence isn't truly silent. It just operates on a different frequency. The kind that slips under your skin without asking permission. You start paying more attention to the sounds of this frozen world. The way snow squeaks under pressure, high-pitched and brittle. The soft flutter of owl wings overhead in the brief moments of twilight. The sudden sharp crack of distant ice splitting, loud enough to make your heart jolt but too far to see. Back inside, the longhouse has its own soundtrack. The fire pit pops and hisses. People murmur, cough, snore. Wood creaks, wool rustles. It's not loud, but it's alive. A living, breathing soundscape of survival. You begin to hear the rhythm in it, the beat of the cold months. And strangely, it comforts you. Later in the day, you walk with Hrolfr to a frozen stream to collect ice blocks for melting. Your boots crunch in rhythm with his, and the only other sound is your own breathing. He stops mid-step, holds up a hand, and you both listen, nothing. And then, far off, a whoomph, a soft, deep sound like someone exhaling under miles of snow. Hrolfr nods. Ice is moving under the river. Good sign. Means it hasn't died. You realise he talks about the landscape the same way he talks about animals. It's not scenery. It's a presence, though, and sound is how you know it's still alive. As the days pass, you learn to distinguish the difference between normal longhouse noises and the ones that matter. A goat stomping in a panic. Possible predator. A beam groaning too loudly. Snow load might be too heavy. Someone coughing in a different rhythm. Get the moss tea ready. In this world, silence is suspicious. Sound is signal. Every creak, every rustle, every breath is information. You're learning to listen like a Viking. That night, Hrolfr shows you a little trick. He places a carved bowl of water on the floor, watches the surface. When the wind comes hard, water will move before we hear it. Sure enough, as the evening deepens, the water ripples, gently then steadily. Moments later, the first howl of wind snakes through the eaves. The house creaks, snow shifts. Everyone inside glances up, unconcerned but alert. The longhouse has heard this before. Here's your historical fact. In winter-bound Norse settlements, especially in Iceland and Greenland, silence wasn't just a backdrop, it was a tool. Sound, or the absence of it, gave critical clues about weather changes, animal behaviour or structural issues in buildings. Experienced farmers and hunters learned to predict danger by listening, often before seeing any evidence. Now for your quirky twist. Norse oral tradition includes references to snow voices, not literal voices, but metaphors for the way snowpack speaks to those who know how to hear it. Some skalds, poets, even included descriptions of the mood of ice in their verses. One Icelandic tale mentions a man who could hear the sky crack before a storm and was considered part elf. Naturally. And tonight's scholarly debate, was Viking sound awareness a cultivated skill, or just a natural result of their environment? Some anthropologists believe it was a deeply ingrained cultural adaptation, a kind of sensory literacy that's nearly extinct in modern times. Others argue it's just what happens when you remove artificial noise. You hear again. The world speaks, and you finally have the quiet to notice. Back in the longhouse, the wind builds outside. You hear it sliding around the curved roof, clawing at the smoke hole, finding all the little cracks in the turf. Inside, someone stokes the fire. A spoon clinks softly against a bowl. The goat grumbles in its sleep. You lie back on your fur mat, eyes closed, and let the longhouse sounds wash over you. It's not silence, not even close. It's the music of endurance, the drumbeat of old wood, soft feet, low voices, the sound of people still here, and under it all, barely audible, the low hum of winter continues. You thought maybe, just maybe, winter would pause the fighting, that surely even the most battle-hardened Viking would look out at a frozen wasteland of knee-deep snow, gale-force winds, and sub-zero temperatures and think, you know what, maybe we skip war season this year. But no, absolutely not. Because apparently not even a solid sheet of ice covering the entire world can keep Vikings from picking up weapons and chasing each other through the snow like angry bears in chainmail. It starts with shouting. Not the usual kind. This is sharper, laced with tension, the kind that cuts through the cold like an axe blade. You're pulling on your boots when the front of the longhouse creaks open and two men rush in, snow spraying behind them. One's panting, the other is bleeding from a gash on his arm. They speak quickly, too fast for you to catch much, but the mood of the room shifts immediately. Adis goes stiff. Hrolfr stands up like someone hit a war drum. You ask what's going on. The answer is direct. Raiders. It doesn't make sense. Raiders? Now? In this weather? But then again, you've seen these people ice bathe and eat shark jerky. Logic froze to death months ago. They say the nearby settlement just a day's travel over the ridge has been hit. Livestock taken. A storage hut burned. No one dead, but that's mostly luck. The attackers, probably a rival clan. Maybe old enemies. Maybe desperate. Winter makes people strange. Hunger makes them strangers. By nightfall, preparations are already underway. Weapons pulled from their spots on the walls, sleds checked and lashed together. Skis, yes skis, dragged from the barn and inspected for cracks. You're half convinced this is still a joke, until you watch Hrolfr tighten the straps on a pair of narrow wooden skis with terrifying calm. You ask, with increasing alarm, "You're going to fight? On skis?" "Yes," he says, as if this is the most natural thing in the world. How else would we catch them? The war party leaves at dawn, which in Viking winter means something between early twilight and still night. They travel light, fur cloaks, shields, spears and bows. No horses, too loud, too slow. Just men gliding over the snow like ghosts, their breath steaming in the dark. You stay behind, but the tension travels with them. What surprises you is how routine it all feels. No speeches, no dramatic goodbyes, just a nod from Hrolfr, a muttered blessing from Adis, and they're gone. As if going to war in the middle of winter is just another line on the chore list between mend fishing net and don't freeze us to death. In their absence, the longhouse feels hollow. Everyone moves quieter. Conversations stop and start like broken wheels. The fire seems smaller. Even the animals sense it. More pacing, more nervous bleating. You help stir a pot of gruel and glance at the door every few minutes, half expecting it to burst open with news. It never does. Then on the third day they return. No trumpets, no celebration. Just the scrape of sled runners on ice and the thump of boots against packed snow. Hrolfr has a bandage over one eye and blood on his beard. Two others are limping. One man isn't with them. They say the raiders were caught, that some were known. That one was a cousin. It was messy, but necessary. Supplies were reclaimed and a warning delivered. In the cold, everything slows down except the consequences. You sit near the fire that night as Hrolfr removes his cloak, stiff with the frost and stained with blood. He doesn't look angry, he looks tired, like someone who's had to dig his own grave but didn't lie down in it just yet. You ask him, why risk it? Why not wait until spring? He looks at you, eyes bleary but steady. 'Cause they won't. Hunger doesn't wait. Fear doesn't wait. And if we don't defend what's ours, they'll come again, cold or not. You think of all the effort this community has poured into surviving the winter. Every woven thread, every cured hide, every frozen root tucked away in a snowbank. It's not just comfort at stake, it's survival. And that means even the most brutal weather isn't enough to stop old grudges or fresh desperation. Here's your historical fact. Winter warfare was not uncommon among Norse peoples, especially in regions like Norway and Iceland, where snow and ice were a year-round reality. Skis were a legitimate form of transport and even battle tactic. Scandinavian warriors trained to fight while skiing using bows and spears. Military training in snow conditions was documented well into later centuries, with Viking roots in the techniques. Quirky detail, there are sagas that describe warriors so adept at winter battle that they could ski century across forests, shoot arrows mid-glide and vanish without a trace. One legendary Viking, Uller, was even worshipped as a god of skiing, archery and naturally duels. So yes, your worst nightmare on the slopes might have been a Viking with a spear, and the scholarly debate, were winter raids acts of strategic brilliance or sheer desperation? Some argue they were designed to catch enemies off guard. No one expects a war party when the rivers are frozen solid. Others believe most such raids were born from scarcity and starvation, not conquest. Either way, it proves something undeniable. The cold was no deterrent to conflict. If anything, it fueled it. That night, as the wounded rest and stories are told in low voices, you lie back and listen, not to the wind or the fire or even the breathing of the animals, but to the silence of survival, the cost of it, the way these people bear their burdens like weapons, always close, always ready. You drift off with the image of Hrolfr on skis, gliding across a frozen field, spear in hand, heart unyielding, and you understand finally that even in the deepest winter the fight never leaves. The snow is falling again, soft and thick this time, not like the dry, biting squalls you've gotten used to. This snow is different, slower, quieter, the kind that hushes the world and makes even the longhouse feel like it's breathing slower. You step outside for air and find the whole village blanketed in new white, roofs heavy with it, pathways gone, everything blurred into softness. And in the centre of this stillness, something is happening. A woman, Aslaug, the same one who gave you birch switches in the bathhouse, is standing just outside her doorway, drawing a strange symbol into the snow with the end of a stick. It's a spiral, or maybe a rune. She finishes, stands over it, then lightly blows across the surface like she's awakening something. When you ask what it is, she answers simply, protection, and then walks inside. You've noticed more of these little signs lately, scratched into beams, etched onto bones, stitched into clothing. Some are runes, sure, but others seem more symbolic, more personal. You ask Inga about them as she mends a sleeve with red thread. She gestures to the pattern she's sewing. This keeps away sickness. My grandmother taught me, her grandmother before her. Then after a pause, it works. That's when you realise what's really going on, winter magic. Not tricks or illusions or wizardry with staffs, but real bone-deep ritual. The kind that lives in repetition, in gestures passed through generations, in the stubborn hope that drawing the same symbol, wearing the same talisman, also saying the same words might just bend fate a little in your favour. You're told that during the deepest months, when the days are a blur and the sun forgets to show up, the veil between worlds thins. That's when the old spirits come closest. Not just the gods, though they're part of it, but older things, local spirits, house wights, ancestral echoes, forces that don't have names anymore, only gestures. Aslaug invites you to help with one of the rituals, and honestly you don't say no, not just because you're curious, but because everyone else is taking it so seriously. If you're the only one not whispering to the walls, it starts to feel like you're the one out of sync. She leads you outside just before nightfall. The snow reflects what little light remains, giving everything a ghostly glow. She carries a bowl filled with ash and crushed herbs. You carry a torch. The flames sputter in the cold air, but it holds. She walks the perimeter of the longhouse, scattering ash in a line as she chants. Not loudly, but with firm rhythm. You can't make out the words. They're older than her. Older than language, maybe. Just shapes made of sound. When she finishes, she hands you a carved piece of wood, simple, flat, with a single rune scorched into it. Place it near your sleeping furs, she says. Speak to it, but only once, then don't touch it. You nod, unsure what to say, and she disappears back into the snow. Back inside, the fire's been dimmed. People are moving slower, not out of fatigue, but reverence. Edith places a small bowl of milk near the door and another near the hearth. For the hidden ones, she murmurs. No one questions it. A young boy places a sprig of dried herbs under his pillow. Another woman rubs soot from the fire onto her wrists. It's subtle, quiet but everywhere, a low current of ritual moving through the night. You ask Hrolfr if he believes in all this. He grunts. I believe in winter. Which is, in its way, an answer. Here's your historical fact. Viking-era Norse people practiced a complex mix of religion, superstition, and animism. In addition to the well-known pantheon of gods, they believed in local spirits, Vettir, and house spirits called husvettir, who needed to be appeased to maintain harmony. Midwinter especially was considered a time of heightened spiritual activity. Small offerings were common, food, ale, or symbolic objects placed in specific parts of the home or land. Quirky fact, some Icelandic settlers left small wooden figurines known as nisse, or tomti, little humanoid spirits with beards and red caps, hidden in the rafters during winter. They weren't part of the Odin-Thor crowd. These were household guardians, mischievous if ignored, protective if respected. And no, they weren't cute. They bit. And the scholarly debate? Historians still argue over how much of Viking-era belief was formal religion versus informal folk magic. Some see these rituals as leftovers from pre-pagan animism, while others argue they were central to the Norse understanding of their place in the world. There's a growing consensus that Norse spirituality wasn't hierarchical, it was layered. Gods above, spirits beside, ancestors within. That night, you sit by the fire holding your little carved rune, unsure whether to whisper to it or just stare. Eventually, you murmur something. Quiet, clumsy, probably wrong, but the moment you do, you feel the weight of the longhouse around you. The thick sod walls, the packed snow outside, the heat from the bodies around you, the heartbeat of the place. You place the rune near your furs and lie down. The wind picks up again, brushing the roof with long, cold fingers. Somewhere beyond the wall, you hear the low crack of shifting ice, followed by silence. You breathe slowly. Close your eyes. Whether or not the magic is real, you believe in the people who believe in it, and maybe that's enough. You wake up gasping. It's not fear exactly, or even cold. It's like you've just surfaced from deep underwater, dragged from a dream that was too big for your brain. You lie there, heart racing, eyes wide in the smoky dark, trying to remember what it was. A woman with antlers, a voice that spoke in water, something chasing you across a frozen lake. It's already slipping away. Around you, the longhouse breathes its usual rhythm. Snores, sighs, soft shuffling. The fire's down to low red coals. Outside, the wind whispers like it knows a secret. But inside you, something is buzzing. Like the dream didn't leave. Like it's still waiting just under the surface. You roll over and stare at the rune Aslaug gave you, still nestled in the fur beside your bed. It hasn't moved. It doesn't glow or hum or whisper ancient wisdom. But still, you can't shake the feeling it's watching or listening. And then it dawns on you. This is normal. Not just for this time or this place, but for this part of winter. The dream world. The place your mind starts to wander when there's no sun to anchor your sense of reality, when the days bleed together and your thoughts stretch thin as ice on a lake. You sit with Idis the next day, helping grind herbs into paste for another batch of cold balm, and ask her if she's ever had strange dreams in the dark season. He nods without looking up. This is when the dead come whispering, she says, completely deadpan, and not all of them speak the truth. You blink. She finally glances up and smirks. Don't worry, most of them lie kindly. It's then you realise that dreaming in winter isn't just a thing that happens to Vikings. It's a known territory. A season unto itself. A time when sleep becomes a kind of second life, when the firelit world and the subconscious world tangle together like wool threads, with no clocks, No sunlight, and nothing to break up the monotony. Your brain starts inventing its own stories, and not always the comforting kind. That night you stay awake as long as you can, staring at the ceiling, counting the smoke-stained beams, listening to the longhouse creak. But eventually sleep wins, and the dreams return. This time it's a vast forest, frost-covered, endless. You walk barefoot through the snow, leaving no prints. Ahead, a man with a stag's head beckons silently, then disappears into the trees. You follow. You always follow. You wake with tears in your eyes and no idea why. You mention it to Hrolfr. He nods slowly and says, "That one comes to me too, usually before a storm." And you laugh, thinking he's joking, but he's not. He just slaps your shoulder and walks off, leaving you wondering how many people in this longhouse have seen the same horned figure, the same endless woods, the same dreamscape snow. Later you hear whispers about a woman who dreamed of fire and lost her husband to it the next day. About a child who dreamed of wolves and found one pacing outside the wall. Dreams aren't treated like fantasies here. They're omens, messages, warnings, not always right, not always clear, but noticed. Taken seriously, some even try to shape their dreams. You watch Inga place a carved stone beneath her pillow, then sleep facing north, murmuring something under her breath. You ask why. To invite the ancestors, she says. Sometimes they remember things we forget. And then there are those who don't want to dream at all. One man ties a strip of rawhide around his wrist before bed and chews a bitter root. "Keeps them out," he mutters. You don't ask what they are. Here's your historical fact. Norse culture placed significant weight on dreams and visions, especially during winter. Sagas often mention prophetic dreams, dream visits from gods or the dead, and the use of dreams as omens for the future. Some Sida practitioners, Norse magic workers, specialised in dream interpretation, often blending herbalism, ritual and trance-like states to walk between waking and sleeping worlds. Your quirky fact: there's evidence that some Viking sleepers used specific sleeping positions to induce certain kinds of dreams. One old Icelandic text claims that sleeping on the right side invited dreams of family, while the left summoned dreams of fate. Whether true or poetic, it's one more example of how carefully these people navigated even their unconscious hours. And the debate: did dreams function as genuine belief systems or as coping mechanisms? Some scholars argue that the long winters and sensory deprivation triggered natural hallucinations, sleep paralysis, and vivid dreaming, which were then interpreted through cultural lenses. Others believe dreams held sacred meaning regardless of their origin. Real or imagined, the dream world mattered. The next morning you wake with a start, your heart pounding. You remember your dream perfectly this time. It was just Hrolfr, standing in the snow, staring at you with empty eyes. He didn't say anything, but when you looked down, your hands were red and warm. You don't tell anyone. You walk outside needing air and stand in the snow barefoot for a moment. It hurts. It wakes you up. The wind brushes against your face, and for a moment you think you hear someone whisper your name. But it's just the wind, probably. You step back inside and pull your furs tighter. Not out of fear. Not even out of cold. Out of respect. For the dream. And the version of yourself that still lives in it. The night sky feels impossibly vast here. You step outside and freeze. Not from the cold this time, but from the sheer weight of it. Stars stretch across the Arctic dome like tiny pinpricks of ice, sharper than anything you've seen back home. The Milky Way arcs overhead like spilled salt on black velvet, and for a moment you forget the cold, the smoke, even the longhouse. You're just a speck staring into eternity. Hrolfr stands beside you, wrapped in layers of fur. He doesn't say anything. You don't expect him to. The silence is a language of its own. He points slowly, almost reverently, at clusters of stars. "These guide us," he murmurs. Not just for travel, he means, for survival. To orient yourself when the world is all white and the wind is a knife. To know direction when the sun sleeps for months. To read the sky like an open book. You've seen star charts before in books, but this is different. The constellations are not abstract patterns. They're landmarks, warnings, guides. Ursa Major, the Great Bear, points north. Cassiopeia forms a faint W above the horizon, a marker for the fjord route. Polaris, stubborn and bright, holds its place like a compass forged from ice. Hrolfr traces the lines with a gloved finger, telling stories as he goes, how the hunters used them to track reindeer, how raiders might follow the same stars in winter. and how the light of the heavens is the only thing that doesn't lie. And then the northern lights begin. Subtle at first, a green shimmer along the horizon, then growing brighter, ribbons of colour dancing across the sky, like spirits moving in slow, deliberate arcs. The Vikings called it Aurora Borealis, but here, Hrolfr whispers a different kind of truth. It's the breath of the gods, or perhaps the ancestors, reminding the living that even in endless cold there is colour, there is motion, there is life. You feel hypnotised. The lights twist and snap above you, casting a faint glow onto the snow and illuminating the longhouse roof like an emerald fire. You realise now why Norse myths often place supernatural beings in the sky. When the world is buried in snow and darkness, these celestial phenomena become reality. They guide, warn, and inspire. They are survival tools as much as they are art. Hrolfr finally speaks again, pointing at a subtle cluster near the horizon. If you follow that star through winter, it leads to food stores, safe routes, sometimes even to help. Lost a man once, Sky guided him. He shrugs, as though this is the most mundane thing imaginable. You nod, trying to absorb the enormity of it. It's not just navigation, it's hope. Later you return to the longhouse, but the image of the lights stays with you. Even inside, when the fire flickers low and the walls groan under snow, you feel it. Tiny, stubborn, like a pulse behind your ribs. The sky itself, a living map, has taught you that survival isn't just about walls, warmth, or food. It's about reading the signs, understanding the rhythm, and trusting what you can't touch. Here's your historical fact. Norse seafarers and settlers in Greenland and Iceland relied heavily on celestial navigation. Long before compasses, they used Polaris, the stars, and seasonal patterns to find safe routes across snow, ice, and sea. Astronomical knowledge was vital for winter survival. Quirky fact, some Vikings believed that the northern lights were the reflection of the shields of the Valkyrie as they rode across the sky, collecting fallen warriors. The lights were both awe-inspiring and a reminder that the dead and the living share the same cold, luminous world. The debate, scholars argue whether the mythological interpretations of the aurora influenced Viking behaviour, or whether practical navigation came first and the stories followed. Likely it was both, a brilliant melding of art, myth, and survival instinct. You lie back in your furs that night thinking of constellations, spritzen, and glowing ribbons of light. The longhouse seems smaller, warmer, safer, yet connected to the vast, untouchable world outside. The sky has taught you a lesson the fire cannot. Survival is not just heat, not just food. It's knowledge, observation, and a willingness to see signs when the night seems endless. The longhouse is quiet when you wake, but not dead. There's a soft murmur of activity, the scrape of boots on packed earth, the low clatter of wooden tools, the whisper of wool being stitched together. You stretch, still groggy, and realise something. Even without a fireplace, the place feels alive. Not just warm in temperature, but warm in spirit. And it occurs to you that survival isn't just about physical comfort, it's mental too. And here, the Vikings have mastered that art. Hrolfr is already up, tending to the fire pit. Not because it's necessary, there's enough body heat in the longhouse to keep the frost from creeping in, but because he likes the ritual. He tends the fire like it's a companion, poking embers, adjusting logs, listening to the faint hiss and crackle. You realise that fire isn't just about warmth here. It's focus, it's meditation. It's a rhythm that marks the day even when the sun doesn't cooperate. You help him stir a pot of porridge, thick and bland but sustaining. You wonder aloud how they manage to keep morale high when the food is repetitive, the days endless, and the cold relentless. Hrolfr shrugs. Stories, songs, work, repetition. The mind needs as much tending as the body. And suddenly the smoke in your lungs, the ache in your fingers, the frozen toes, it all starts to make sense. Every task, every chant, every story is a little ember in the mental hearth. By midday, the longhouse hums like a living organism. Inga braids rope near the wall, a child sharpens a knife beside her, and someone else repairs a sled with painstaking patience. Each person's labour overlaps the others rhythmically, quietly. There's no chaos, just flow. Even the animals contribute to the temperature and structure of life. Their breaths, movements, and small sounds are part of a symphony that keeps despair at bay. You notice something else. The Vikings' fire of the mind is contagious. People converse in patterns, hum songs under their breath, tell stories that stretch across the room without a single voice dominating. You try a small story yourself, something from your own world, and the room listens, not politely but attentively. They critique, embellish, laugh, and you feel it, the spark of connection, warmth that doesn't come from flame, but from shared attention, shared humanity. Adius approaches, a handful of small tools in her fur-covered hands. She begins a demonstration of knotwork, intricate patterns passed down through generations. Your fingers fumble as you try to follow. She laughs softly. Winter teaches patience. Fire teaches skill. Together they teach survival. Her words lodge somewhere in your chest. You realize that everything in this place, every ritual, every chore, every story, every bead of sweat exists to train you not just to live, but to endure with grace. Later you step outside. The air is cold but still, and the sky has lightened slightly, silver instead of black. The northern lights are faint tonight, mere whispers along the horizon, but they're enough to remind you that the world continues beyond the longhouse walls, and that thought is surprisingly comforting. Even if your body freezes, your mind remains afire, flickering and alive. Here's your historical fact. Vikings placed extraordinary value on mental endurance in addition to physical survival. Oral tradition, storytelling and communal work helped maintain morale during long Arctic winters. The structure and rhythm of daily life combined with social rituals were crucial for keeping communities cohesive through months of darkness and isolation. Quirky fact. Some sagas describe Vikings using memory songs, simple melodies to memorize complex tasks, such as weaving, tracking animals, or counting stored provisions. These tunes doubled as entertainment and mental exercise, essentially turning labour into music-based survival training. And the debate? Scholars argue whether these mental practices were consciously developed as psychological tools or arose naturally from social cohesion needs. Either way, it's clear. Surviving winter was as much about sharpening the mind as it was about stoking the fire pit. In the absence of conventional comforts, the Vikings relied on the strength of the intellect and the collective spirit, and it was just as vital as any heat source. You lie back that night, watching smoke curl lazily toward the ceiling. Your body is exhausted, but your mind hums with small victories, knots tied correctly, porridge stirred just right, a story remembered, a song hummed. The fire of the hearth is small, but the fire in your head is wide and roaring. You finally understand this is what keeps the longhouse alive when the Arctic seeks to claim it. It's the fire of thought, ritual and shared existence, and it burns hotter than any log. Spring doesn't announce itself politely. There's no calendar, no songbird suddenly appearing, no sunlight stretching over the horizon like a hand lifting the lid off the world. Instead, it creeps in quietly, reluctantly, almost apologetically. One morning you wake to find that the snow has softened in odd places, forming puddles beneath the longhouse eaves. The ice along the frozen river groans differently, a dull, shifting hum rather than its usual crack and moan. And the wind has changed. It carries hints of mud, of thawing grass, of water not yet sealed. You recognize it instantly. Change is here. Spring has arrived, slowly and with no fanfare. Inside the longhouse, people notice it too. Adie steps outside and lets her cloak fall from her shoulders, letting the first warmth brush her arms. Hrolfr adjusts the fire, knowing less warmth is needed, but keeping embers alive anyway, a safety precaution and a signal that winter has not surrendered fully. Children fling open doors, laughing as snow slush hits boots, and animals stir more eagerly, sensing more daylight, more freedom and more feed. Even the goats seem lighter, their breath no longer curling into icy clouds indoors. The whole place vibrates differently, like a heartbeat returning to normal after a long frozen pause. You wander through the thawed perimeter, noticing things you barely saw before. Mud beneath the snow is rich and fragrant. Sticks poke out at odd angles, remnants of last autumn's fallen branches. Frost has retreated from tree bark, leaving shiny veins of moisture that glint in the pale sunlight. Everything seems alive again, just waking, just beginning. You realize the Vikings knew this moment better than any calendar could tell them. The first thaw was a signal, a call to action, a warning and a promise at once. Spring is here, work begins anew, and survival enters its next phase. Food scarcity shifts too. Frozen caches thaw slowly, and the first vegetables of the season are carefully dug out of storage. People handle the provisions with the reverence of those who survived months of deprivation. Leftover preserved meat is re-examined, herbs are sorted, dried roots weighed, and water from newly flowing streams is collected, tested, and stored. The longhouse transforms again, from a chamber of survival to a hub of preparation for the new cycle. Winter is over, but the struggle for sustenance never truly ends. This change also brings social shifts. Children run more freely outside, playing games with sticks and snow rather than cooped in the longhouse. Work outside becomes possible, repairs to the fence, clearing pathways, mending roof thatch damaged by heavy winter snows. Adults collaborate differently, taking advantage of daylight and slightly warmer temperatures. Even storytelling adapts. Tales of frost and endurance give way to songs of hunting, planting, and preparation for fishing season. The community breathes collectively, rhythmically, as if the thaw itself has lifted a weight from their shoulders. Here's your historical fact. In Norse settlements, the transition from winter to spring marked a critical phase in survival. Communities shifted focus from indoor maintenance and preservation to outdoor work, including repairing homes, preparing fields for planting, and hunting migratory animals returning to the region. This seasonal adaptation was crucial to long-term survival in the Arctic. Quirky fact, some Icelandic farms still keep a tradition of spring cleansing, where the first meltwater is used to wash homes, clean utensils, and even bless livestock. It's both practical and ceremonial, carrying echoes of ancient Norse survival customs. Water that thawed the snow literally marked renewal. And the scholarly debate? Some historians argue that Vikings timed raids and trade expeditions specifically to align with spring thaw, when travel was safer and resources were more abundant. Others insist that survival imperatives, such as tending livestock, repairing longhouses, and reclaiming stored food, dominated communal activity before any thoughts of raiding or trading. Likely it was both. The physical thaw dictated opportunity, and cultural priorities dictated how that opportunity was used. As you step back inside the longhouse that evening, the air is warmer, damp in places, heavy with the scent of melting snow and mud. Furs no longer cling to skin with the sharpness of frost. The fire pit is reduced to glowing embers, barely necessary but still comforting. You watch Hrolfa and Idis discuss tasks, children chase each other with their newfound energy, and animals stretch their legs in the thawed pen. For the first time in months, it feels like the longhouse is not just surviving, it's living. And in that moment you understand that survival isn't a single winter challenge, a single feat of endurance or a single skill learned in the cold. Survival is an ongoing rhythm, a cycle of ice, snow, thaw, and work. It's watching the world change outside the walls and adjusting inside them. It's learning to read the signs, to prepare for the unknown, and to cherish the moments when life, finally, feels almost easy. By now you've stopped counting days, hours, or even nights. Time here has melted into cycles: sleep, eat, work, tell stories, survive, repeat. And yet spring brings subtle urgency. Snow melts faster than your muscles can adjust. Streams rise, carrying ice chunks that make you nervous for the livestock. The ground softens into mud, and every step outside now carries risk. You feel it in your bones. Winter's tyranny is ending, but survival doesn't retire with frost. The longhouse hums differently now. It's brighter, wetter, and smells of thawed straw and steaming animal breath mingled with the fresh scent of snowmelt. Children run barefoot through shallow puddles, squealing as if the world itself has become a playground. Adults repair fences, roofs, and sheds with renewed energy, pacing their work to take advantage of daylight. There's a rhythm to it, less intense than winter, more fluid, but no less critical. Everything you do now has consequences. A mislaid bundle of straw, a weak fence post, a skipped chore. It could mean livestock lost or sickness spreading. You find yourself walking among the longhouse walls, noticing the small miracles you took for granted during the harsh months. Sod walls that withstood blizzards without faltering. Wooden beams that groaned but never collapsed. Smoke-stained rafters, still black, still holding the roof above 20 souls and half a dozen animals. You realise survival is as much about construction as it is about fire or food. Every beam, every plank, every piece of turf was painstakingly chosen, shaped, and maintained to create this fragile bastion against the Arctic, and it has endured. Hrolfa joins you, pulling a bucket of water from the slowly flowing stream. Spring always comes, he says, his voice calm, almost ceremonial. But not everyone does. Remember that. You nod, watching him handle the bucket, careful not to drop it, careful not to disturb the ice remnants that float like ghosts in the water. Survival is quiet, precise, relentless, and the people here know it intimately. The thaw also brings reflection. You notice who survived, who grew stronger, who adapted, and who did not. Conversations with Adis and Inga revolve around lessons learned. Which food caches worked, which clothing layers kept frostbite at bay, how group sleeping maintained morale and heat, which stories lifted spirits when the dark seemed endless. Even the goats and cows are assessed. Health, weight and temperament. Because every creature contributes to human endurance. You begin to understand the ecosystem of survival, humans, animals, architecture, ritual, knowledge, all intertwined. And yet, amid the practicality, there's gratitude. For warmth, for food, for the pulse of life continuing inside the longhouse. The old men smile, younger men laugh. And children, blessedly oblivious to winter's horrors, chase each other across muddy grounds, bringing chaos that is both distracting and rejuvenating. Even the scent of thawed hay and manure carries comfort now, a tangible reminder of life persisting through hardship. Here's your historical fact. Archaeological evidence from Norse settlements in Iceland, Greenland and northern Scandinavia confirms that longhouses were central to survival, housing both humans and animals. Shared living spaces allowed heat conservation and communal labour, crucial during the long Arctic winters when isolation could be deadly. Winter preparations, preserved food and building maintenance were deliberate strategies passed from one generation to the next. Quirky fact, some Viking households used snowmelt as a way to test structural integrity. If water seeped too quickly through the roof or walls, adjustments were made immediately. They called it listening to the house, treating the building almost like a living companion with needs and vulnerabilities. The debate, scholars differ on whether Norse survival was primarily the result of ingenious architecture, communal strategies, or sheer human adaptability. Most agree it was a combination. Enduring Arctic winters required layered knowledge, practical, social and psychological. Houses, clothing, food, ritual and storytelling formed a network that ensured survival against overwhelming odds. As the thaw progresses, the longhouse doesn't just endure, it thrives. People move with purpose, animals graze cautiously, and the first hints of green push through receding snow. You take it all in, understanding now that survival is not a single act of heroism, but a mosaic of countless small, persistent choices. Every winter endured, every meal shared, every story told, every careful repair, it all counts, it all adds up. And here, in this sturdy, smoke-streaked longhouse, life persists against the coldest odds imaginable. The longhouse is quiet now, the bustle of spring's early tasks fading into evening calm. You stretch, feeling the lingering warmth of shared bodies and the soft thrum of life that permeates the structure. Outside, the Arctic landscape has shifted from stark white to mottled grey and green. Streams gurgle, snowbanks slump, and the wind carries hints of thawed earth and growing plants. It's a subtle symphony of change, one you've come to recognise as proof of life persisting against impossible odds. Months ago, you shivered at the thought of surviving without fire. Now you understand that survival was never just about heat. It was about rhythm, adaptation, community, and the quiet rituals that knit everyone together. You reflect on what you've witnessed and endured. The smoke-filled longhouse where a single pit fire balanced cooking, warmth, and air. The careful layering of clothing, fur, and body heat. The meticulous storage of food that allowed life to continue through months of darkness. The stories, rituals, and games that maintained mental fortitude. And the extraordinary ingenuity of living in harmony with animals, the architecture, and the environment. Every detail was a testament to human resilience, creativity, and foresight. You realize that fire wasn't always necessary when knowledge, cooperation, and observation filled its place. The Arctic winters demanded more than strength, they demanded intelligence, attention, and respect for both the environment and the people sharing it. You think back to the rituals, the tales of gods and ancestors, the whispered guidance of the stars and northern lights. Every element, practical, symbolic, or both, was integrated into a survival system that prioritized both immediate life and long-term cultural continuity. Even the dreams of winter, once terrifying and vivid, now make sense as part of the mental scaffolding the Vikings relied upon to endure prolonged darkness. Magic, story, observation, and work were all interwoven, creating a tapestry that preserved not only life but identity, community, and knowledge. You rise and step outside one last time, inhaling the crisp, warming air. The longhouse behind you feels like a living being, soot-stained walls and timbered beams holding stories of survival, laughter, hardship, and triumph. The snow has softened, the streams carry new energy, and the wind, once a relentless threat, now whispers gently across the thawing landscape. You understand that survival here was not a singular event but a constant engagement with the world. Careful observation, consistent labour, shared responsibility, and the quiet courage to face months of darkness and cold without complaint. As you lie back on your fur one final time, the longhouse hums with the gentle sounds of contented animals, children drifting to sleep and adults winding down their tasks. You feel the pulse of the building, of the community, of life itself, a rhythm that persisted despite the Arctic winter's harshness. The lessons of the cold months are clear. Survival is not merely about warmth or food, but about harmony, preparation, and connection. You close your eyes, the lingering scent of fire, wool, and thawing earth grounding you in this extraordinary experience. The sun dips low, casting long, forgiving shadows across the landscape, and you know that what you've witnessed, the ingenuity, resilience, and enduring spirit of the Vikings, will stay with you long after the Arctic winter has passed.